childhood through his adulthood, through, basically everything that they knew about Hitler. And that report was not declassified until 1972, when it was incorporated into a book titled The Mind of Adolf Hitler. As the New York Times explained that year, 1972, the quote, Langer saw Hitler as a weakling who masqueraded as a bully. Hitler the failure, casting himself in the role, unconsciously for reasons of mental self-preservation, as Hitler the Führer the Superman. Right. And based on Langer's work, the OSS summarized the strategy that Hitler used, driven in part by his own psychopathy, or psychopathy, to both seize and hold power. Quote, his primary rules were, now just listen to this. This is the OSS describing Adolf Hitler in 1943. His primary rules were never let the public cool off, never admit a fault or wrong, never concede that there might be some good in your enemy, never leave room for alternatives, never accept blame, concentrate on one enemy at a time and blame him for everything that goes wrong. People will believe a big lie sooner than a little one, and if you repeat it frequently enough, people will sooner or later believe it. End of quote. Sound familiar? And now, most recently, we learned that Donald Trump has told us that he intends to use the military to go after his so-called enemies. The military is... Trump said, I think the bigger problem is the enemy from within. We have some very bad people. We have some sick, radical left lunatics. It should be very easily handled by, if necessary, by the National Guard, or if really necessary, by the military, because they can't let that happen. End quote. And, we learned this past weekend that former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Milley, told Bob Woodward, quote, no one has ever been as dangerous to this country as Donald Trump. Now I realize he's a total fascist. He is the most dangerous person to this country. The Washington Post added that General Milley told them that he, quote, also fears being recalled to uniform to be court-martialed for disloyalty should Trump win against Vice President Kamala Harris in November. Milley's fear of being put in front of a firing squad is well placed. Trump himself told Woodward about Milley and other generals, quote, I will order them back to active duty and then I will court-martial them. Rolling Stone magazine, reporters Aswang Subasang and Patrick Reese wrote an article for Rolling Stone in which they interviewed a number of people who'd been very close to Donald Trump when he was in the White House. The headline of their article kind of summarizes the whole thing. Quote, Trump plans to bring back firing squads, group executions if he retakes White House. Right. And Trump has promised to go after journalists. He calls us the enemies of the people. I mean, I think that might be one of the reasons why so many journalists have gone so soft on Trump. And frankly, I have little doubt that if he's elected, he'll do everything he can to break people like me. And you, if you've ever posted anything on Facebook or Twitter or any social media against Trump. I mean, Viktor Orban is arresting people for saying bad things about him on Facebook. Putin has been, putting people in prison for years for speaking out against him on social media. And then you got Mike Flynn, who was pardoned from prison for lying to the FBI about his meetings with the Russian ambassador. And Trump has promised him a job in the next administration. He was in Reverend Moon's son's church and said, believe me, if we win, then Katie bar the door. Believe me, the gates of hell, my hell, will be unleashed. Right. So here we have, Donald Trump laying out basically a fascist vision for America. And then you got, Trump's protege, J.D. Vance, his vice presidential running mate, who, if Trump gets elected, will almost certainly become president sometime in the next 4 years, given how old Trump is and what kind of poor health he's in. Last night, he had this town hall, in fact, with Kristi Noem moderating. Now, town halls are where you answer questions from the people, right? So Trump shows up for the town hall. He gets 2 questions. He completely flubs both of them. just goes into these long, rambling, things that didn't make any sense, and he didn't answer either question. And then he says, let's just listen to music. And he stands there for 39 minutes listening to Time to Say Goodbye, Pavarotti, I think it was. And, just Ave Maria, right? And people are scratching their head going, what's the deal? What happened? And, I think it's fairly obvious. He didn't want to answer any more questions. He knew that he didn't have answers. And he didn't want to just do his regular rant, his rally rant, because he didn't have a teleprompter. And this was a town hall. So what does he do? He says, let's listen to music for almost an hour. After only answering 2 questions at a time. I mean, he just, by the way, he just also backed out. This news just broke like in the last hour. He was scheduled to be on CNBC's Squawk Box, the business show. And he backed out of that one too. And then you got, as I said, J.D. Vance, whose mentor, or this obscure political philosopher that J.D. Vance seems to worship, has argued that a reasonable way to deal with people who are, quote, not productive would be to, quote, convert them into biodiesel, which can help power the minibuses. Right. He also said that, quote, real Holocaust-free Nazism has never been tried. Yeah, just what we need, right? And as Rachel Maddow pointed out, this guy says that we need to replace our president with a chief executive officer, a CEO, and that Americans have to get over their dictator phobia. It's not like we weren't warned about these guys. Barry Goldwater in 1964, in the speech when he accepted his nomination for president, Republican nomination for president in 64, he said, and I quote, "Now those who seek absolute power, even though they seek it to do what they regard as good, are simply demanding the right to enforce their own version of heaven on earth. And let me remind you, they are the very ones who always create the most hellish tyrannies. Absolute power does corrupt, and those who seek it must be suspect and must be opposed." But here we are. I mean, Hitler publicly argued sentiments to the effect of, I will get rid of the communist vermin. I will take care of the enemy within. Jews and migrants are poisoning Aryan blood. And one people, one nation, one leader. These were Hitler's slogans. Sound familiar? I lived in West Germany back in the 1980s. I knew people who were actually, I knew 2 people who were in the Hitler Youth, and I knew one guy who was a spy for Hitler. And, I mean, they were all horrified by what had happened and their role in it, frankly. They're all dead now. But, and my friend Armin Lehman, was the 16-year-old courier who personally delivered to Adolf Hitler the news that the war was lost and stood outside his bunker as Hitler committed suicide. It can happen here. Vote. I'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
18 minutes past the hour. Stick around. We'll be right back. More of the news right after this. In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at ThomHartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the HartmannReport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at ThomHartmann.com. So check them all out at ThomHartmann.com and HartmannReport.com. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Criminology on Trump by Greg Barak. This is from the introduction. Criminology on Trump is about family business, habitual lawlessness, and the struggle for economic and political power. The central character, Donald Trump, is a con artist, a master gaslighter, and a shrewd racketeer. It is the story of how the Houdini of white-collar crime and the founder and CEO of the Trump Organization operated a criminal enterprise from within an incorporated organization beginning in 1980 and continuing up to and from within the bowels of the White House for 4 years. At the same time, it's the history of the causation of the social, psychological, and physical harms connected to the Donald and his associates before, during, and after the presidency. This book is also an account of the activities that Donald Trump pursued in order to obtain the power of Commander-in-Chief of the United States, what he then did with that power of the bully pulpit once he achieved it, and finally the lengths to which he would go to keep from losing that power. Lastly, this is the story of what many elected and appointed politicos did or did not do to acquire or to forfeit their individual shares of Trumpian power. This overall analysis of the underside of the rule of law begs the question, had the Donald not become the 45th president of the United States, would he, his children, or the Trump Organization have found themselves formal defendants and legal adversaries of the people of the state of New York? My answer unequivocally would have been no way. As of January 6, 2022, the question remains open as to whether Donald Trump, as the former president, or any of his family members will ever be indicted and prosecuted for criminal tax fraud and the other felonies, along with the Trump Organization, Inc., and its CFO, Alan Weisselberg. From the point of view of newsmaking, lawlessness, and equal justice, much of the popular discourse surrounding Trump has to do with competing narratives. The most reverberating of these has been the dueling apocalyptic narratives traversing both old and new media platforms alike. One narrative has to do with witch hunts, hoaxes, fake news, global elites, and the deep state engaging in a myriad of underworld and otherworld conspiracies to bring down Trump. The other narrative has to do with saving the U.S. democracy from authoritarianism, recovering law and order from the damage, chaos, and trauma of Trump, and restoring American normalcy without all of that political insanity. While these two narratives capture the cultural conflict, the diverse groups of people at work here and the rival social movements of incompatible interests, desires, and visions, neither speaks to the fundamental structural conditions that generate the divisiveness between these two narratives. Without ever addressing these structural relationships, the two sides will remain at loggerheads for some time to come. The medium is always, as always, is still the message. And so far in the 21st century, social media is the medium. At the same time, the weaponizing of racism, misogyny, hate, fear, intimidation, and violence vis-a-vis social media is neither new nor unique to the United States. These socio-cultural expressions of the contradictions of patriarchy, neocolonialism, and capitalism have been around since the nation's inception. Today's Proud Boys are the contemporary versions of New England churchmen in the 1700s, the Klan riders of the 1800s, or the fervent followers of Joseph McCarthy in the 1950s. Likewise, the anti-critical race theory politicians of today that do the bidding for white minority rule and racial discrimination are very much the same as John C. Calhoun fronting for the rich plantation owners during the antebellum South. The primary differences between the not-so-distant past of the last 75 years and the present have to do with the disbursements of the accumulation of capital. From post-World War II until around 1974, the United States experienced close to 3 decades of unparalleled upward social mobility, as well as a rapidly expanding middle class. However, since the mid-1970s to 2022, there's been a steady increase in economic inequality, a shrinking middle class, and downward social mobility for many. Thus, the contemporary bipartisan erosion of the liberal capitalist consensus in the United States is not the primary cause of our present democratic crisis, but it is rather symptomatic of a much broader problem that neither the Republicans, as a whole, nor most of the Democrats are willing to accept. The book, continuing. I'm referring to the inability of our bourgeois democratic system to resolve the contradictions of a political economy that promises the American dream to one and all and yet caters to the richest 1% and provides suitably for the upper 10%. In other words, our country's present-day conflicts over identity politics, government failures, neoliberal policies, right-wing intransigencies, and climate change not only predate Donald Trump and Trumpism, but they are all fundamentally driven by the unrelenting and expanding political economy of structural inequality. What makes this Trump book different from the others is that it is the only one grounded in the scientific study of crime and social control. Criminology focuses on the pathology of harmful acts and the cultural construction of both crime and punishment. The book is Criminology on Trump by Greg Barak. Greg Barak, by the way, is an expert in criminology, as you might guess.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
11 days till the day probably before or maybe 2 days before we find out what's going on. Keep in mind, Republicans in Pennsylvania back in 2019 to help Donald Trump steal the 2020 election changed the rules of voting in Pennsylvania, which is the largest of all the swing states, the most electoral votes, so that the ballots can't even be counted until all the other ballots have been counted. In other words, it'll be Wednesday or Thursday before we know Pennsylvania's count, probably Wednesday afternoon. And but anyway, 11 days to election day. I'm not holding my breath. I just, I don't think we're going to know Tuesday night, but we'll see. I mean, it could be that there's just an overwhelming wave. A lot to talk about today. Did you catch the CNN town hall last night? It was just amazing. We'll get to that in just a moment. Also, if we don't break the cycle, Trump is always going to lurk in the shadows. We've got to talk about this. And a crazy alert, can anything get weirder than Tucker Carlson talking about daddy's home? Seriously, we'll get to that. But his own daddy, by the way, used to run NPR, or the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. I guess it's called CPB, the whole thing. In hour 2, Dean Obeidallah is going to drop by. Is Trump America's Hitler? Yeah. But what about his movement? Is MAGA a fascist movement? And yes, it can get even weirder. A MAGA pastor compares women to pigs with gold nose rings and calls for repealing the 19th Amendment. That's the 19th Amendment from 1920 that gave women the right to vote. Also, Phil Ittner will drop by with an update from Ukraine. And Craig Unger, the secret history of the treason that, basically brought, it's called Den of Spies, and the secret history of the treason that, here's the title, Den of Spies, Reagan, Carter, and the secret history of the treason that stole the White House. Sorry. Got a half a headline here. But anyhow, that's what's up for our show today. Last night in the CNN town hall, Kamala Harris was, quite explicit. She said, Donald Trump is a fascist. She looked right into the camera and said, let's be clear, Donald Trump has an enemies list and I have a to-do list for the American voter, which was just, like the evening's number one moment, or number two moment. The number one moment was when she was asked, do you think that Donald Trump is a fascist. And she said, yeah. she said, yes, I do. And later she brought it up herself. She said, if elected, Donald Trump will, quote, be a president who admires dictators and is a fascist, referencing General Kelly's remarks. And keep in mind, General Kelly is the guy who oversaw the child separation policy for the Trump administration. He was Trump's chief of staff for 2 years. He was his national security advisor before that. And, he was the Secretary of Homeland Security before that. And he oversaw, Trump's attempts to build the wall with Mexico. He was at the forefront of the separation policy. And when he left the administration, Kelly joined the board of a company operating the nation's largest detention center for unaccompanied migrant children. So this is not some hero of liberal democracy or some guy who's a Democrat or even, has some compassion for children. This guy was right there in the middle of it with Donald Trump for 2 whole years. And he's coming out and saying Donald Trump is a fascist. And Kamala Harris is citing him. She says his statement to the press, and he's made several statements now to the press, is a, quote, 9/11 call to the American people. She said, I believe Donald Trump is a danger to the well-being and security of the United States of America. And she said that the American people deserve a president who maintains certain standards, which include, quote, certainly not comparing him oneself in a clearly admiring way to Adolf Hitler. Yeah. Sadly, I think there's, a couple of generations of young people who really have no, only the fringiest understanding of who Adolf Hitler was. I mean, World War II and Adolf Hitler were a big part of the history that I studied when I was in elementary and middle school back in the 60s, the 50s. But I suspect a lot of that has washed away in the last 3, 4, 5 decades, and, it just ain't happening anymore. Anyhow, after the town hall with Anderson Cooper, Kamala Harris stepped outside and talked to reporters, and she said, this is a window into who Donald Trump really is from the people who know him best, from the people who have worked with him side by side in the Oval Office and at the Situation Room. And as I said, John Kelly didn't just work with Trump side by side. He executed Trump's order to tear children from their mother's breasts, to literally remove nursing children from their mothers and put them in cages. This is the guy who's calling Trump a fascist. Clearly, John Kelly doesn't think he's a fascist, but I mean, he's also the guy to whom Donald Trump said that American soldiers who died in Normandy, who died storming that beach, who died ending World War II, that those soldiers were suckers and losers. And when he went with Kelly to Arlington and Kelly wanted to visit his own son's grave, Trump was like, why would anybody do that? Why would anybody be willing to get killed for their country? Donald Trump doesn't understand that. He thinks everybody should be as selfish as he is. So here's Donald Trump, being a fascist. Here's John Kelly, General John Kelly, a Marine general, saying Donald Trump is clearly a fascist. He meets the definition of fascist. And then, what do the Republicans say? Chris Sununu, who is, the governor of New Hampshire, the son of the former governor of New Hampshire and the former chief of staff for, was it George Herbert Walker Bush? I think. I'm pretty sure it was John Sununu. Chris. Anyhow, he comes from a New Hampshire political dynasty. So he goes on CNN and he says, look, we've heard a lot of extreme things about Donald Trump, from Donald Trump. It's really just par for the course. Unfortunately, with a guy like that, it's kind of baked into the vote at this point. He was asked right up, So, the guy who worked for him for 2 years, who oversaw his child separation policy, who oversaw his building a wall down on the southern border, the guy who was his chief of staff, who was closest to him for 2 years, out of the 4 years he was in the White House, says says Trump's a fascist. Does that change your opinion of Trump? And Sununu was like, no, I'm still going to roll over for him. I'm still afraid of him. I don't want him attacking me. I won't be able to run for political office if he attacks me again. I mean, he's not literally saying those things, but in my mind, that's clearly what he's saying. It's incredible. If we don't break the cycle, a Trump will always lurk in the shadows. This is, I want to get into this, into my op-ed here today about how because of Citizens United, because of the Supreme Court legalizing political bribery and corruption, we've got billionaires funding fascists in the United States, and it's not going to stop when Trump leaves unless we do something major about it.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Stick around. We'll get to that in a few minutes. It's 15 minutes past the hour. And welcome back. Ziggy in Oni out of New York. Hey, Ziggy, what's up?
Hey, Tom. A couple weeks ago, you asked me if our Governor Hochul was doing anything good, and I think she's doing something real fabulous here, and I want to make sure that the people of New York State know about it.
Okay.
And what it is called the Qualified Medicare Beneficiary, and it's administered through the New York State Department of Health through what they call their Medicare Savings Program. Again, that's Qualified Medicare Beneficiary. And what it does, it will pay for all your Part A, your Part B premiums, deductibles, coinsurance, and your Part D. And it's not that hard to qualify for. If you're single, you must be receiving $31,000 or less in Social Security. If you're a couple, it's $42,000 in Social Security benefits.
And the state just picks up everything? Wow, that's amazing. Do you have to apply for it? It's not automatic?
You have to apply for it, and you apply for it through your social services department, your local county social service department. Mm-hmm. I've been helping a couple of people who are doing this, mm-hmm. and what happens is it's just like any other payment on Medicare. It will come. In other words, instead of being charged the $1,700, $174, it'll not even charge you on your Medicare. And then when you got to go to a doctor or something like that, you'll be putting on that you're receiving this qualified Medicare beneficiary, and it will take care of your deductibles for you automatically.
Wow. Is any of that money considered income? Is it taxable?
As far as I know, it's not. Mm-hmm. It doesn't say anything on the program about it.
Yeah.
And I've had the form, and like I said, I've helped a couple of people who are applying for it. The only thing I got to mention, too, that's part of the reason why I wanted to call in early about this, is it's only during open enrollment period. So it ends as of December 7th. So, and you have to be in New York State. I don't know if any other states are doing this, but, Hochul can't get anyone to publicize it because the insurance companies don't want it being advertised. But, she's really trying to do some good here with this kind of program, in my opinion.
Yeah. It doesn't fill in the 20% that a Medigap policy would, though, right?
I believe so, yes, because it pays the deductibles and coinsurance.
Oh, wow. Oh, so it pays for the coinsurance would be the Medigap policy, so it pays for your Medigap policy. Yeah. That's incredible.
So, I know, it's almost like having Medicare Advantage without having the possibility of being denied, ripping off the government, and having to get the pre-authorization, more or less.
Right, yeah, for sure.
I mean, I wish you graduated the income limits because I don't quite qualify for it. Yeah. But I know a lot of people who do. Yeah. And I just wanted to make that people aware about it in New York State.
Do you know if any other states have initiatives or programs like this or are contemplating them?
I I don't know, because I'm in New York State and I'm helping people here, and this is what I've found. I'm wondering about that, but I haven't done a search on it or anything like that, Tom.
Well, that's very cool.
So,
well, Ziggy, thank you. Thanks.
So yep.
Yeah, thanks.
Take care.
Thanks so much for the heads up. That's just great. Once again, Ziggy, what's your website?
Oh, endbribes.com.
Endbribes.com. Okay, thank you. Good talking to you, Ziggy. Always. It's 19 minutes past the hour. I'll be back with you in 60 seconds, and we got just some amazing stuff. Stick around. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. Fort Lauderdale, Florida recently got whacked with 25 inches of rainfall in less than 7 hours. Tornadoes are tearing up the South and the Midwest in ways that they haven't seen, frankly, ever before. I mean, there have always been tornadoes, but not like these. 200-mile-an-hour winds, these derecos that are a mile long. We have a serious crisis going on right now. There's also a major El Nino. It's off the coast of Peru right now. It's affecting the West Coast. So we're seeing wild swings from drought to floods to drought to floods in the West Coast. Climate change is here. Climate change is real, and climate change is a crisis. What do we know about it? What do we know about these things? How much worse is it going to get before it might get better? What can we do about it? We had a long conversation with Dr. Michael Mann, Distinguished Professor and Director of the Center for Science, Sustainability, and the Media at the University of Pennsylvania. There's a whole long rant about this over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out.
There's a darkness creeping near, can't you feel the chill? It's the echo of a voice that won't ever stand still. Rich men pull the strings, money speaks too loud. They're feeding lies and anger to a hungry crowd. A Trump will always lurk in the shadows.
Trump will always lurk in the shadows as long as dark money, lies, and hate dominate politics. Yep, which the next line in that song. Suddenly it seems the American mainstream media has figured out that Donald Trump is a fascist, and they're talking about it. You know, a lot of commentators, including myself, have wondered out loud, what's going to happen to the Republican Party if Trump loses? Well, let's talk about that for a minute, because frankly, I believe that's what's going to happen. I mean, you know, God only knows, but that's what I believe is going to happen. I don't think, and I know I've said in the past that maybe that'll burst their bubble, and to some extent it might. I suspect that there will be a bit of a civil war in the Republican Party, but that said, it seems that most of the Republicans who might have a shred of integrity left have been flushed out of the party, and all you've got left are wimps and sycophants. People who are just terrified of Donald Trump, but not just Trump. They're terrified of the billionaires who are behind Trump. Keep in mind, the vast majority of Trump's funding is coming from a handful of right-wing billionaires, whereas the vast majority of Kamala Harris's funding is coming from donations from people like you and me, $100 donations. But, you know, we've had authoritarian politics in America before. You had John Adams shutting down newspapers and imprisoning publishers. And, you know, Jefferson put an end to that. Dan Sisson and I wrote a book about it, The American Revolution of 1800. You had the Confederacy. It was clearly a fascist movement. It was run and funded almost entirely by the wealthiest men in the South. Lincoln put an end to that. You had the Klan of the 1880s to the 1940s, another fascist movement. Senator Joe McCarthy's 1950s crusade wasn't just supported by American fascists, but he and his friends were actually getting money and support from German Nazis, actual German Nazis. Rachel Maddow blows that all up, tells that story. You know, basically we've handled these authoritarian movements. But, you know, Adams was defeated by Jefferson. Confederacy was defeated in the Civil War. The Klan lost popular support after World War II. Joe McCarthy was done in by Joseph Welch and Edward R. Murrow. there are still some structural problems here, and it's really important to recognize them. 5 Republicans on the U.S. Supreme Court put a fascism-friendly time bomb into our body of constitutional law when Lewis Powell in 1978 wrote the decision in First National Bank versus Bellotti, saying that billionaires and corporate persons had a First Amendment right to pour money into politics because money into politics was the same thing as free speech. And then that crime was massively amplified when a different set of 5 Republicans on the Supreme Court doubled down on legalizing corruption and bribery with Citizens United in 2010. And as a result, today you've got a handful of American billionaires who are quite willing to fund Trump's fascist movement. And I think that they will fund any fascist movement. On top of that, 6 corrupt Republicans on the Supreme Court itself have thrown in with Trump's fascist movement. Keep in mind, there was the Anderson case before the Supreme Court year before last, which I think was probably the most consequential of the last couple of years. I get it, Dobbs was a big deal, but consider this. The Constitution says, and I quote, "No person shall hold any office, civil or military, under the United States or under any state, who shall have engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the same or given aid and comfort to the enemies thereof." Donald Trump should not be on the ballot. He led an insurrection against the United States that, had it succeeded, would have overturned the 2020 election. You can't sugarcoat that. But the Supreme Court decided that, well, the Constitution doesn't say what it says. And finally, we see all this evidence that Republicans are continuing in this fascist tradition with these smarmy, greasy Republican politicians like Ted Cruz and Lindsey Graham and Mike Johnson and Chris Sununu going on TV every Sunday on the talk shows and Sunday politics shows and going, "Oh, yeah, we still support Donald. Oh, don't worry. Yes, maybe he's a fascist, but it's not that big a deal." It's just weird stuff. Trump, has a significant advantage here. He's a lifelong liar. He was trained, NBC spent millions to train him to do television. So he has kind of an advantage over other Republicans should there be an effort to replace him, and I think there will be if he loses this election. Almost certainly. I mean, he's not going to run for re-election in 4 years. So who's it going to be? I don't think there's anybody yet who has his level of willingness to lie and ability to cause people to believe his lies. But somebody, I guarantee you, somebody is going to step up and say, "Oh no, I'm the next Donald Trump," and they're going to do it with lies and fascism. Is it going to be Josh Hawley? Is it going to be Tom Cotton? Is it going to be Ted Cruz? Who do you think is going to be the next fascist leader of the Republican Party? Or do you think that I'm wrong? Do you think that it's possible that regardless of Citizens United and the Supreme Court, that the fascist movement will die with Donald Trump? And what do we do about this? I mean, in the 40s, we dealt with fascists. Hollywood did, the Army did. We need to be speaking out loudly.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
I'll be right back with a crazy alert about Tucker Carlson and your calls. Stay tuned.
It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Meat Racket, The Secret Takeover of America's Food Business by Christopher Leonard. This is from the prologue. It's titled The Hidden King. Nobody ever visits the stranded little community of Waldron, Arkansas. But even if they did, a tourist would never see the place for what it really is. Most outsiders would be fooled into thinking it was an actual small town. On any given morning, the residents awaken and begin their routine along Main Street. Old men park their pickup trucks by the curb in front of the Rock Cafe, which opens early for breakfast. As the cafe's booths and tables fill up, a congregation of old-timers in cowboy hats gathers in a loose ring of aluminum chairs out front, smoking and talking and stubbing out their cigarette butts in a bucket full of sand. Later in the morning, Chambers Bank in the south end of town opens up, and the tellers cheerfully greet customers by name. On Thursday at noon, the livestock auction opens in a cavernous barn on the north side of town, drawing crowds of ranchers who haul steel trailers behind their trucks with cows staring out between the horizontal slats. In the late afternoon, teenagers park their cars by the gazebo south of the auction barn, proudly displaying their Mustangs and Broncos like big game trophies. These events have a rhythm of their own, the clockwork functioning of a small-town economy. But it's all just window dressing. All of it would cease to exist in a moment and have no impact whatsoever on the true Waldron or its true economic reason for being. The real tempo of the town's economic pulse is measured by the coming and going of semi-trucks that roll down Main Street at periodic intervals, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. In the middle of the night, tanker trucks full of animal feed rumble past the empty stores and out onto country roads that lead into the hilly terrain that surrounds town. At dawn, other trucks trundle in from the hills, heaped high with battered metal crates full of chickens that exude clouds of white feathers along the highway. The tempo can be measured in the regular arrival of train cars full of grain and oil seeds that dump their loads at a feed mill that clanks and hums and churns all night. And in the parade of refrigerated trucks that pull up to a slaughterhouse near the feed mill and get loaded with pallets of frozen meat. This is the real functioning of Waldron, Arkansas, and its true reason for being. This is the heartbeat of Tyson Foods, the nation's biggest meat company. Yeah, the Tyson plant on the north end of Waldron is the only thing that keeps the town on the map. Appropriately, many residents simply refer to it as the complex. That's because the Tyson plant isn't just a factory, it's more like an entire small-town economy consolidated into one property. The complex contains its own feed mill and hatchery, its own trucking line and slaughterhouse that covers several acres of land and processes about 1 million dead chickens a week. The complex is like an economic dark star that has drawn into itself all the independent businesses, an economic dark star that has drawn into itself all the independent businesses that used to define a small town like Waldron, the kinds of businesses that were once the economic pillars of rural America. Of course, tourists to Waldron would never see the Tyson plant, and not just because it sits on the north fringe of town away from Main Street. Visitors are stopped at its front gate and forbidden from exploring its grounds. So a tourist would have to be content to stroll along the sidewalks downtown, observing the fake Main Street, the deceptive array of little businesses that make it seem like a community. This illusory appearance cloaks Tyson's existence all the way from its roots in rural America to the grocery store shelves and restaurant menus where its products finally reach American consumers. The average shopper is usually fooled when he or she peruses the meat aisle, seeing what appears to be an abundance of choices and products. Tyson brand name wouldn't necessarily stand out with its logo gracing just a handful of products. But the rotisserie chicken slowly turning in its oven, the Bonisi brand pepperoni, the Lady Astor brand chicken cordon bleu, the frozen chicken pot pie, and the Wright brand bacon all come from the same company, Tyson. And then there is all the unlabeled meat that Tyson floods into the U.S. food system every day. The meat served in cafeterias, nursing homes, fast food restaurants, and suburban eateries where more and more Americans eat their meals. There's a very good chance that any of the meat purchased in these places was made by Tyson. Even if Tyson did not produce a given piece of meat, the consumer is really only picking between different versions of the same commodified beef, chicken, and pork that is produced throughout a system that Tyson pioneered. Tyson's few competitors have resorted to imitating the company's business model just to survive. This book aims to explore the vast hidden territory between the remote farms and towns like Waldron, where Tyson raises millions of animals, and the final point of contact where consumers buy the company's meat. Unseen between these two poles is a hidden power structure that has quietly reshaped U.S. rural economies while gaining unprecedented control over the nation's meat supply. Just a handful of companies produce nearly all the meat consumed in the United States, and Tyson is the king among them. The company sits atop a powerful oligarchy of corporations that determines how animals are raised, how much farmers get paid, and how meat is processed, all while reaping massive profits and remaining almost entirely opaque to the consumer. Because Tyson and its imitators are based in the geographic and economic fringes of America in forgotten places like Waldron, the company has managed to escape the scrutiny it deserves. While Tyson's operations are remote, the company's business practices affect virtually everyone. About 95% of Americans eat chicken, which means they almost certainly eat chicken produced by Tyson. And then it goes on from there. The book is The Meat Racket, The Secret Takeover of America's Food Industry by Christopher Leonard.
know that every weekday we send out an email before the show giving you all the topics coming up so you can be fully informed and ready to interact with our program? Or that after the show we send out Sue's Stack, a list of every topic I've discussed along with clickable hot links to every source of information I've shared with you on the air? It's all completely free and available over at thom.tv, THOM.tv. Check it out. Welcome back. 34 minutes past the hour. So Tucker Carlson gave a speech Wednesday night at a Donald Trump rally last night. And I mean, it was in Duluth, I believe. And in his speech, he says, now just get this. This is, actually, let me preface this by pointing out that, there is this model of the difference between the Democratic and Republican Party. George Lakoff laid this out to begin with. And it's that the Republicans in general and conservatives more broadly want a father figure. They want the strict parent. They want a punishing father who will keep the country in line and slap around the bad guys and, protect us all. They want daddy. Whereas Democrats want a nurturing family. They want the whole family. They want dad and mom and the kids to, everybody has a say and everybody has, yes, there's, normal family dynamics and all that kind of stuff, but so you've got this strict parent versus the nurturing family model, the strict parent Republican, nurturing family Democratic. Now, Tucker Carlson last night. These words are Tucker Carlson's verbatim. Quote, "There has to be a point at which Dad comes home." Yeah, that's right. Dad comes home and he's pissed. Dad is pissed. He's not vengeful. He loves his children, disobedient as they may be. And when Dad gets home, you know what he says? "You've been a bad girl. You've been a bad little girl and you're getting a vigorous spanking right now. And no, it's not going to hurt me more than it hurts you. No, it's not. I'm not going to lie. It's going to hurt you a lot more than it hurts me." End quote. End of quote. Now, it gets even, and that just, Tucker Carlson's little speech, that got, that just lit up social media. James Singer, this is effing weird. Chris Jackson, a local political party chair in Tennessee, says these people are absolutely sick. Lincoln Project, Tucker thinks daddy government needs to come in and control your life because you're not capable of making your own decisions. If you're a coward like you might love iron-fisted tyrants like Putin and Trump, but here in America we don't lick anyone's boots. And then Trump gets on stage, and CNN even remarked about this, and the crowd starts chanting, "Daddy's here." It was a huge crowd, by the way. This stadium was full. Daddy's here. Wow. This is just, it's mind-boggling. All right, so what's on your mind today? Rocco in Chicago. Hey, Rocco, what's up? Rocco?
Hello? Hey, listen, I'm sorry. I got the noise in the background right now. Hello, is this Tom?
That is. You're on the air.
Tom, listen, Michelle Obama said you got to do something, right? Mm-hmm. Well, I got something that people can do, all right? We got to push this lady. We got to make her go from Madam Vice President to Madam President. And here's the deal. Call banking.
Phone banking.
You may talk to your 5 or 6 friends. Talk to your 5 or 6 friends. But here's the deal. Go to Google Harris Walls and phone banking. Every state of the union, red and blue, we're all calling in to those battleground states, reminding people to vote. Right. Now, as an individual, you may sit down for 3 hours and only talk to 15 people, okay? But you got to remember, there's thousands of these phone banks going on. Mm-hmm. And this is what's going to push this thing over. This is what's going to make this happen. People can get involved. I mean, you can sit there like a nervous wreck and worry about what's going to happen. But, you can also do something, and you can do something that's productive. Yes, your portion will be very accumulative, but you can do something.
Yeah, I agree, Rocco. And it's a little late now for sending out postcards, but phone banking and door knocking, just going door to door, too. Those are both great opportunities, and we do need to get the vote out, particularly in the battleground states.
Could you remind people through the day to do this? That they can get involved, that they can do this. Please remind people to do this. You're not doing it for me, Tom.
Yeah, I got it, Rocco. Thanks a lot for the call. Thank you for the inspiration. It's a good one. Alfredo in Mountain View, California. Hey, Alfredo, what's up?
Hey, hi, Tom. I got to get this off my chest. We can no longer call the Republican Party Republicans. This is a fascist party. It's not just Trump. Mm-hmm. No Republican has come out and criticized Trump for embracing Hitler. This is just unbelievable to me.
Yeah.
But we can no longer call them Republicans. This is a fascist party.
Yep.
And I wanted to ask you also this.
And let me just add to that, Alfredo, if I can.
Sure.
I was just seeing an article about a couple of Salem media guys, Mike Gallagher and Dennis Prager, I think, doing in front of 1,000 people yesterday or the day before, doing an event, promoting Trump. We've got fascist media too. It's across multiple radio networks and systems, hundreds of radio shows, right-wing radio shows. You've got 3 fascist television networks now. The Murdoch family is clearly all in on fascism. Let's just call it what it is. Yes. Back to you, Alfredo.
How pathetic is this party? Even Mitch McConnell was calling Trump an idiot, among other things, and he's still endorsing this guy.
I know.
They have no moral fiber, no ethical standards whatsoever. Yeah. I wanted to ask you also, you mentioned that the Republicans passed this law in Pennsylvania that they will count the votes only on the last day. Mm-hmm. I wanted to ask you, my feeling is that Pennsylvania is going to be the battleground for a stop the count try for these people trying to overturn, the election. What do you think about that?
I agree. I think it's extremely likely. I think it's a high probability. Yeah. We'll see. But clearly the Republicans have a strategy. They're going to do everything they can to get this thing to the Supreme Court and then get the Supreme Court to throw it to the House of Representatives, where Trump will be elected, whether we like it or not. There's no doubt in my mind.
Boy. Well, thank you for everything you're doing, Tom.
Yeah.
I get all my news from you every day. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Alfredo. I appreciate the call. Mark in Long Beach, California. Hey, Mark, what's up?
Good morning, Tom.
Hey.
I just have 2 points for you. Mm-hmm. Number 1, on MSNBC, I heard if Humphrey in '68 had done a better job of distancing himself from LBJ and had the election been just 1 week later, Humphrey would have won. In your opinion, is Kamala Harris doing a good job distancing herself from Biden?
Well, it's Kamala Harris, first off. And let me just speak to Humphrey for a moment. Humphrey, LBJ and Hubert Humphrey had worked out a peace deal with both North and South Vietnam in June, July, and August of 1968. Richard Nixon learned about it and sabotaged it in September. So Humphrey, and the election was in November. So Humphrey really didn't have time to distance himself from LBJ. And LBJ was not willing to allow him to point out that Richard Nixon had just committed treason, because he was concerned that that would destroy the Republican Party and cause people to lose faith in our government. It was a very different time. In terms of Kamala Harris distancing herself from Joe Biden, she's, last night on CNN, she said, I'm my own person. I have my own experiences. I'm not running for a second Biden term. I will be doing things my own way. She said that repeatedly. For her to, as a sitting vice president, for her to actually challenge Biden to say, no, I don't agree with his policy with regard to Israel and Gaza, for example, which I think is probably going to be at the top of her list. that would be actually destructive, and I think that would hurt her with a chunk of the Democratic constituency. So I think she's walking a very, very delicate and dangerous line, and that's what she's got to do.
Okay, and then the second one is, I missed your show yesterday. I try and listen to you every day, and I just wanted to know if you are aware of 2 Georgia State Supreme Court decisions that is going to help the Democrats in regards to the election.
What are those?
One is, oh my gosh, I had them on the tip of my tongue, but if you go on Yahoo or Google, the Democrats were very happy. They sued, and I couldn't believe it, but it was 2 decisions, and I hope during your break maybe you could, you will see, and maybe you could tell your audience.
Okay. Thank you, Mark. It's 45 minutes past the hour. It's the Thom Hartmann Program. Picking up your calls here. I'll be right back with more of your calls in just a moment. Stay tuned.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's talk media for the rest of us. I'll be right back with more of your calls in just a moment. And welcome back. Oh, look at that. We got 167 viewers over on Substack. Hi there. Very cool. You've got to have the app on your phone to be able to see that. Anyhow, picking up your calls, Diane in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Hey, Diane, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I just had a thought. The Constitution is and was so sacred to us. Mm-hmm. We cared so much about it, we kept it in a vault. And then in 1952, they transported it to the Rotunda vault to be put on display because they said it shouldn't be kept in the dark. It should be out where all Americans or anyone who comes to America to see. Mm-hmm. So on our senior trip, we went to that place and we were looking at it. And at the time, we said, okay, where do they keep the real one? And she said, the tour guide said, no, that is the real one. Mm-hmm. We got to see every crossing of the T's, dotting of the I's that was written on that at that time. Right. We were astounded. We were so afraid when someone do something to it and says, no, look at the thickness of the glass. It's well protected. Mm-hmm. And we were just, and I got to thinking, we're having a Washington, Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin moment. I mean, we're having the Thomas Paine give me liberty or give me death. This is what this,
Patrick Henry,
they knew. Yeah, they knew what that meant. And I don't think we know what it means because they have promises. They promised us, the Heritage Foundation, 2025, all of them, they put it in writing. It's in the bank. They're going to take that Constitution away from us.
Yeah, give them half a chance. Yep.
Yeah, and I don't know if I said it, but Thomas Paine said, give me liberty or give me death.
No, actually, that was Patrick Henry who said that, but I understand your sentiment.
Thank you for keeping me honest. And we don't even have to put our lives and our valuables and our reputation, our homes and families on the line like they did back then. All we have to do is vote for Harris.
Yeah.
Kamala Harris is all we have to do.
And Democrats up and down the ticket. Yep.
Yes, and up and down the ticket, the whole 9 yards. We don't have to go to war with the enemy. Yeah. We can just vote them out, those scoundrels.
Yep.
Those good-for-nothing scoundrels.
Bottom line is get out there and vote.
Yeah. Save our Constitution, because without it, we're a banana republic. We're a second-rate country. Yeah. We don't have laws. Everything is all our laws are based on the Constitution. The Supreme Court supposedly uses that as their benchmark for everything. Mm-hmm.
I think the Constitution has been moved to the National Archives, hasn't it? I got a library card.
In the Rotunda, there's an archive. That's what it says, the Archive Rotunda, the National Archives.
Oh, in the Rotunda of the National Archives, right. Not the Rotunda, not the Rotunda of the Capitol building. Okay, got it.
No,
because I've been there.
I think maybe security is better there. Yes.
Yeah.
And I mean, it is just amazing to think of it. And we have to do that. We have to save our country. We're on that Declaration of Independence, a Revolutionary War, in a sense, to save our Constitution. Because without it, we're not a country. We're not America. We're not America.
Oh, yeah, I get it. Diane, I'm with you. Thank you very much for the call, and thanks for sharing that story, that personal story. Yeah, there you go. Vote for Harris. It's 49 minutes past the hour. I'll be back with more of your calls in 60 seconds. Stay with us. It's the Thom Hartmann Program. Talk media for the sane among us. Yes, we are still here. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. When Ronald Reagan took over America in 1981, we handed him a brand gleaming new country. Franklin Roosevelt, Harry Truman, Dwight Eisenhower, Jack Kennedy, they had built America. We had brand new schools, brand new hospitals, brand new interstate highway systems, brand new airports, infrastructure. We were the envy of the world. And then Republicans came along and they said, well, you just cut the top tax rate from 74% down to 27% and everything will trickle down. Instead, what do we get? Billionaires and poverty. They said, hey, just deregulate guns and an armed society is a polite society. Instead, we've got more school shootings than anywhere in the world. They said, just kill off civics and history classes in our schools and it'll liberate our young people to focus on science and math. Now we've got people who don't know how our government works. I mean, it just goes on from there. There's a whole rant about it over at HartmannReport.com titled FDR Saved America, Then the GOP Ripped Us Apart. Check it out. Picking up your calls here. John in Niles, Michigan. Hey, John, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, I really appreciate it, you and your callers, and I'll be very brief for you and your other callers because they're very important. Just a fun and very effective way to get out the vote, which is very consequential. And don't worry about calling people or even knocking on doors. I'll give you an example, real quick here. This morning, I asked my family physician and his RN to please vote, and I said it was very consequential. And then I saw my cardiologist and the RN, as well as 3 billing people, 7 people total this morning, that the vote, please vote, it's very consequential. So, you know, whether you go to your doctors or the supermarket cashiers, Lowe's or Home Depot cashiers, convenience stores, all you have to say is please vote. It's very consequential.
Yeah.
That's all I have to say, Tom.
Well, that's brilliant, John. Thank you very much for that. Appreciate the call. James in North Hollywood. Hey, James, what's up?
Yes. I'm just concerned that the Democrats and maybe particularly Kamala Harris don't really clearly explain what, like fascism. How many people in America really understand what fascism is?
Yeah, I'm guessing probably less than 15%.
So when you say that, they don't understand what that would mean for them if
yeah, when I was watching Kamala Harris's town hall last night, there were a couple of questions where I was like, you know, she really needs to drill down and explain these things. It was. I don't know. It was kind of disappointing.
Yeah, for instance, like, you know, they accuse her of flip-flopping on the fracking thing. Well, the fact of the matter is, if you say, like, okay, yeah, I was against fracking because I was worried about the environment. Well, the environment is a concern. However, the fact is that our needs for energy increase 2% every year, and that we can't keep up unless we invest in like Microsoft and Amazon are investing in nuclear energy. Well, that takes years to develop. So in the meantime, we need fracking.
Yeah, I get it. But back to the point of explaining fascism. I thought she should have said, when she was using the word fascist, she should have followed it up by saying, and Donald Trump wants to put me in prison. Donald Trump wants to put, or he wants to put John Kelly and Mark Milley in front of a firing squad. These are the things the fascists do. They will come to your house. They will drag you out. They're going to build concentration camps. This is what fascists do. And she didn't. But I have a feeling that more of that's coming. James, thanks for the call. Bob in Kingston, Michigan. Hey, Bob, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
Now that Trump has become a dictator and all that kind of stuff, could you mention what gun control is like in other countries that have dictators like Korea and North Korea and stuff?
Well, I think all over the world you see governments, whether they're run by dictators or whether they're run by the people, saying that guns are instruments that are designed explicitly to kill people, setting aside hunting weapons. And they need to be regulated because they're deadly. There's a reason why we require driver's licenses and liability insurance to drive a car, because cars can kill people. I mean, in Switzerland, for example, you've got to have, even your hunting rifle has to be registered. Same thing in Germany, same thing in France. I mean, most of these democratic countries have pretty rigorous gun control laws. And the result of that is that, here in the United States, where we have virtually none, the leading cause of childhood death is bullets. We're the only country, literally the only country in the world where that's the case, whether it's a dictatorship or a democracy, Bob.
Yeah, I agree with you, but
I get it that the gun lobby, the gun manufacturers, in an effort to make more hundreds of billions of dollars in profits, have been promoting this idea for a long, long time that the first thing dictators do is they take away people's guns. The fact of the matter is, when Adolf Hitler became Chancellor of Germany, there were strong gun control laws in place. He actually loosened the gun control laws, and the Hitler Youth had shooting and rifles as part of their training. So Hitler did the opposite. He essentially made it easier for people to be armed, and a lot of those arms were used then to harass and even kill Jews, gays, and what they called communists and socialists. So I don't buy this thing that guns are the thing that prevent tyranny. I just don't buy it. I get it. The American Revolution was fought with guns and all that kind of thing, but if you think that having an armed populace is going to back down politicians, you're living in the 17th century or the 18th century. It just is not the case any longer, Bob.
Yeah, I thought maybe they'd take them away.
Who does what? Dictators take away guns?
Well, fascists. Yeah.
Yeah, well, occasionally. I mean, some do, some don't. I don't know about Mussolini. I'm not sure about Pinochet, but certainly Hitler didn't take away guns. Hitler made guns more easily available. Bob, I got to run. We're hitting the top of the hour here. Dean Obeidallah is going to drop by on the other side of this break. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at ThomHartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the HartmannReport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at ThomHartmann.com. So check them all out at ThomHartmann.com and HartmannReport.com.
fight back!
Book Club today. Our book is by Frantz Fanon, and it's The Wretched of the Earth. This is from the chapter on national culture on page 145. It sort of reads like Thomas Paine, actually. Each generation must discover its mission, fulfill it, or betray it in relative opacity. In the underdeveloped countries, preceding generations have simultaneously resisted the insidious agenda of colonialism and paved the way for the emergence of the current struggles. Now that we are in the heat of combat, we must shed the habit of decrying the efforts of our forefathers or feigning incomprehension at their silence or passiveness. They fought as best they could with the weapons they possessed at the time, and if their struggle did not reverberate throughout the international arena, the reason should be attributed not so much to a lack of heroism, but to a fundamentally different international situation. More than one colonized subject had to say, "We've had enough." More than one tribe had to rebel. More than one peasant revolt had to be quelled. More than one demonstration had to be repressed for us to stand firm, certain of our victory. For those of us who are determined to break the back of colonialism, our historic mission is to authorize every revolt, every desperate act, and every attack aborted or drowned in blood. In this chapter, we'll analyze the fundamental issue of the legitimate claim to a nation. The political party that mobilizes the people, however, is little concerned with this issue of legitimacy. Political parties are concerned solely with daily reality, and it is in the name of this reality, in the name of this immediacy which influences the present and future of men and women, that they make their call to action. The political party may very well speak of the nation in emotional terms, but it is primarily interested in getting the people who are listening to understand that they must join in the struggle if they quite simply want to exist. We now know that in the first phase of the national struggle, colonialism attempts to diffuse nationalist demands by manipulating economic doctrine. At the first sign of a dispute, colonialism feigns comprehension by acknowledging with ostentatious humility that the territory is suffering from serious underdevelopment that requires major social and economic reforms. And it is true that certain spectacular measures, such as the opening of work sites for the unemployed here and there, delay the formation of a national consciousness by a few years. But sooner or later, colonialism realizes it is incapable of achieving a program of socioeconomic reforms that would satisfy the aspirations of the colonized masses. Even when it comes to filling their bellies, colonialism proves to be inherently powerless. The colonial state very quickly discovers that any attempt to disarm the national parties at a purely economic level would be tantamount to practicing in the colonies what it did not want to do in its own territory. And it is no coincidence that today the doctrine of Cartierism is on the rise just about everywhere. Cartier's bitter disillusionment with France's stubborn determination to retain ties with people it will have to feed, whereas so many French citizens are in dire straits, reflects colonialism's inability to transform itself into a nonpartisan aid program. Hence, once again, no need to waste time repeating, better to go hungry with dignity than to eat one's fill in slavery. On the contrary, we must persuade ourselves that colonialism is incapable of procuring for colonized people the material conditions likely to make them forget their quest for dignity. Once colonialism has understood where its social reform tactics would lead it, back come the old reflexes of adding police reinforcements, dispatching troops, and establishing a regime of terror better suited to its interests and its psychology. Within the political parties, or rather parallel to them, we find the cultured class of colonized intellectuals. The recognition of a national culture and its right to exist represent their favorite stomping ground. Whereas the politicians integrate their action in the present, the intellectuals place themselves in the context of history. Faced with the colonized intellectuals' debunking of the colonist theory of a pre-colonial barbarism, colonialism's response is mute. It is especially mute since the ideas put forward by the young colonized intelligentsia are widely accepted by metropolitan specialists. It is in fact now commonly recognized that for several decades, numerous European researchers have widely rehabilitated African, Mexican, and Peruvian civilizations. Some have been surprised by the passion invested by the colonized intellectuals in their defense of a national culture. But those who consider this passion exaggerated are strangely apt to forget that their psyches and their egos are conveniently safeguarded by the French or German culture, whose worth has been proven and which has gone unchallenged. I concede the fact that the actual existence of an Aztec civilization has done little to change the diet of today's Mexican peasant. I concede that whatever proof there is of the once mighty Songhai civilization does not change the fact that the Songhais today are undernourished, illiterate, abandoned to the skies and water, with a blank mind and glazed eyes. But as we have said on several occasions, this passionate quest for a national culture prior to the colonial era can be justified by the colonized intellectuals' shared interest in stepping back and taking a hard look at the Western culture in which they risk becoming ensnared. Fully aware that they're in the process of losing themselves and consequently of being lost to their people, these men work away with raging heart and furious mind to renew contact with their people's oldest inner essence, the furthest removed from colonial times. Let us delve deeper. Perhaps this passion and this rage are nurtured, or at least guided, by the secret hope of discovering beyond the pleasant wretchedness, beyond the self-hatred, something that redeems us.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome to the second hour of our program. On the line with us is our friend and buddy and my colleague, Dean Obeidallah, who is the host of the brilliant Dean Obeidallah Show on Sirius XM, Progress Channel 127, every weekday, 6 to 9 p.m. Eastern Time, 3 to 6 p.m. Pacific Time. He's also a columnist over at MSNBC Daily and Salon.com, and he has just a remarkable newsletter that I get in my email inbox periodically, several times a week typically, titled The Dean's Report. You can go over to Substack.com and just put in Dean's Report, and it'll pop right up. The Dean of Radio, Dean Obeidallah, DeanObeidallah.substack.com, at Dean Obeidallah over on Twitter. Dean, welcome back to the program. Yesterday, your piece was, John Kelly is warning us that J.D. Vance was right, Trump is America's Hitler. Today, you took it a step farther. Tell us about this.
Well, today it's based on what Vice President Harris said last night at the town hall with CNN. She was asked, she first quoted Kelly and Mark Milley saying Donald Trump is a fascist. And Anderson Cooper said, what do you think? Do you think he's a fascist? And she said, yes, I do. So that's the first time she's affirmatively said that. She sort of agreed with Charlemagne the God in a radio interview a couple weeks ago, but this time she said it affirmatively. Yeah. My point is, yes, Donald Trump is a fascist, but Trump being a fascist alone and just yelling on the streets anti-democratic, anti-American things would not be that concerning. It's the fact that millions of Americans hear that message and love it. And so that's my point, Tom, that she's right, but half the story is missing. And what's actually more alarming is millions and millions of Americans listen to Trump. They like it. They want an authoritarian. They want America's Hitler. People have to grasp it. I'm not saying everyone supporting Trump wants America's Hitler. A lot of people, I have friends who barely follow politics. Some of them like Trump. There's nothing I can say because they're like, I like this or whatever. I'm talking about the hardcore MAGA. MAGA is a fascist movement. Trump is their fascist leader. It's not one or the other. They're together. So Trump is a fascist, but MAGA is the fascist movement that he's created.
What percentage of the Republican Party today do you think is really and truly fascist, Dean?
53.24%. I've done my own polling. It's hard to know, Tom. I will say in my latest article that I did have polling from the past, and there's not been new polling on this in over a year and a half, about 55, 60% of Republicans, of all Republicans, view January 6th as an act of patriotism.
Right.
And to me, that's a pretty good start. When you're looking at that and they're saying violence in the furtherance of Trump's power is patriotic, then I think it's fair to say you're talking about that 55, 60% base. I don't know now. Maybe the other Republicans have left and it's a bigger percentage of the MAGA base. But of MAGA, look, if you're MAGA, you're going to the rallies, you love Trump, you following everything, you cheer when he says the enemy within is Democrats, which he's saying at event after event, and they're cheering, and people must understand they're cheering. Well, look, that's fascism. They're a fascist movement. And Tom, I put in my new article today, Hitler, Chancellor of Germany, January of 1933. By March, he starts his first concentration camps for political opponents, for the Social Democrats, for
right.
communists.
It was not Jews he was throwing in concentration camps in March of 33. Right. It was Democrats.
Right, exactly. And my point is, if Donald Trump did that to us, his base would cheer. And people must understand that. The MAGA base would cheer that. And these are our fellow Americans, just like in Germany. They were their fellow Germans. Yep. And they turned on them because their loyalty goes to the fascist leader above the state. And that's what Hitler demanded, and that's what Trump demands now. And that was the whole comments with John Kelly about he wanted generals like Hitler had. Forget that they tried to kill him. He's talking big picture. He's talking in Germany.
It was the German generals who oversaw the Holocaust. I mean,
they executed the Holocaust. They were the one, right? They planned it. It was the military. And Tom, as you know, and I put in my article yesterday, not shortly into Hitler's regime, he made a new oath that the military, everyone in the military had to take. It was an oath to Adolf Hitler personally, unconditional loyalty. That's what it called for. Yeah. Risk your life for Hitler. It wasn't for Germany. It wasn't for the Constitution. It was for Hitler. That's what Trump meant. Trump might not read a lot about history, but he got that part. And that's what he was getting at with John Kelly.
Yeah. Yeah. So if roughly half of Republicans are fascists, are MAGA fascists,
I think it's fair to say,
and roughly half of America are Republicans, then about a quarter of Americans are fascists. How do we, or for that matter, how does the Republican Party separate itself from the fascists within it? Or how do we ostracize the fascists? What happens if Trump, we've discussed if Trump wins, right? We all end up in concentration camps. You and I will probably, actually we're in different coasts, so we'll probably be in very different concentration camps. But if he loses, how do we break that? How does the GOP regain its sensibility? How do the Mitt Romneys take their party back over again? Or is that even impossible at this point in your mind?
Well, I would just say take a step back quickly. If Trump wins, that some are going to go to Canada, I'm going to New Jersey. No one's going to bomb. That's where I'm from. No one's coming to Jersey. I'll hide in Bayonne or Newark or Paramus, where I'm from. I'll be fine. Come to Jersey. We'll build a big wall, multicultural, multiracial wall against Donald Trump. So I feel good about that. Now, if I have to go back to Jersey, I love Jersey. I'm a Jersey guy. I live in New York. I'll go back to Jersey. Look, we have to defeat MAGA and Donald Trump. If you defeat the fascist leader here, it could have an impact internally in their party. I don't really care what happens internally. I care about defeating Donald Trump. And
an awful lot of it has to do with who's in charge. I mean, when Pinochet went down, his movement in Chile largely died. When Mussolini was hanged, his movement largely died. Well, he was losing the war or lost the war. When Hitler died, his movement largely died. But on the one hand. On the other hand, in all of those countries, in Chile, in Argentina, across South America, across Europe, we're seeing a rise of a whole brand new variety of fascism. Most of it is grounded in white supremacy and hate and fear of brown-skinned immigrants who are basically fleeing climate change in most cases. And certainly that's what's happening here. But what that suggests is that you can have a temporary reprieve if you get the leader out of the way. But what do you do long term? My op-ed today is suggesting that that the federal government should revive the Office of Information Services. The War Department was running in 1943 when they produced films like Don't Be a Sucker. What do you think?
Look, I'm for anything. I mean, first, all I'm thinking about right now is defeating Donald Trump and winning back the House.
Right.
And those two are the key And if, God forbid, Trump were to win, we have to have the House. That's the firewall against legislation. He can sign the executive orders he wants, but he won't be able to pass legislation into law. But after that, sure, we can have these discussions. I'm open to them. I think, to me, one of the greatest crimes of Donald Trump was misleading otherwise patriotic, good Americans and lying to them about the threat of immigrants, lying to them about the election on 2020. Now, some are predisposed. They are in their soul white supremacists. But others, I think we try to peel some of them away. And to your bigger point, like I had Dr. Bandy Leon like a year ago, who deals a lot with gangs, and made the point, when the charismatic gang leader is gone, the gang starts to fracture and dissolve. So Donald Trump is a leader of a movement here. And I think that really does happen. I think, and the more fractured it is, the less powerful it is. They're going to have pockets of the country. They'll have their red state pockets. But look at Ron DeSantis in Florida. I just had Representative Anna Escamani on my show yesterday. DeSantis tried to use the government apparatus to threaten TV stations from running ads that were pro-Amendment 4 for abortion rights, reproductive rights, threatening criminal action against them for running ads. You know, Ron DeSantis is spending state money to oppose Amendment 4 and 3 on marijuana. The line between politics and government apparatus is gone in Florida. It is DeSantis stand. So, you know, you've got those mini guys out there, but he's not charismatic. He's not Donald Trump. He'll be gone as governor in a couple of years. We have to defeat Trump. If people want to slow this down, this process, and maybe defeat it, the number one thing is defeating Donald Trump. That's all my number one priority.
He is a larger-than-life figure, and NBC helped make him that. I mean, you know, I would say probably all of his followers and even most Americans think he's a successful businessman. They don't realize that, you know, he has failed at pretty much everything he's done, and much of his success is because he's, you know, one of the world's major money launderers, you know, for international criminals and regimes like Russia. But
certainly,
I'm wondering if there is another charismatic Republican who's going to try to jump at that. You know, J.D. Vance is going to do it. He doesn't have the charisma.
Sure.
You know, Tom Cotton and Josh Hawley are probably going to try. They don't have the charisma. You know, Ted Cruz, if he makes it through this election, he's going to try. He doesn't have the charisma. Lindsey Graham doesn't have a chance. I mean, do you see anyone on the horizon who could be the next Trump in the GOP?
Not right now, but they could emerge. And the minute they become more and more popular, all of a sudden they have charisma because it starts feeding on itself.
Do you think Elon Musk could be that person?
Well, thankfully, he wasn't born in America, so he can't run for president. But I will say Elon Musk, to me, is Donald Trump's minister of propaganda.
Yeah.
That's what his role is now. It's really, he's the Goebbels of MAGA. And people should understand that. Elon Musk has too much power. I believe Elon Musk is a danger to our nation. I really do.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm not hyperbolic. I view he's a minister of propaganda in the worst way. Whatever his sinister intentions are yet to reveal themselves. And Tom, to your newsletter today, to me, after this election, working on getting big money out of politics is going to be one of my top priorities. How we do that? You know, amend the Constitution, expand the Supreme Court, whatever it takes. You want to save this democratic republic, get big money out. The idea
it can be done by Congress, Dean. You know, you just invoke Article 3, Section 2. It can be done by Congress. You can say, you know, the Supreme Court may not rule on this. I mean, that's built into the Patriot Act, for God's sake. You know, and you know, written by Republicans. You can tell the Supreme Court that they can, you know, hey, we're overturning your decision, and you can't reverse this. You know, and it's never been adjudicated, but it certainly been put into legislation more than 100 times in the last 50, 60 years.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
Let's take step one. The idea of these billionaires, that 3 billionaires have given Donald Trump $250,000. We live in the Gilded Age.
$250 million.
Right, $250 million.
Yeah.
I said million, $250 million. This is the Gilded Age. This is the Vanderbilts and Roosevelts and J.P. Morgan. And we're living through this, and we need a new progressive era to be a backlash to this that can correct this. Because this is going so... The oligarchy's here, as you know, Tom. You've written about it.
Get over to Substack.com and type in Dean's Report and subscribe to Dean Obeidallah's newsletter. Hang on.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Guy always steps on me. Check out his radio show, Channel 127, Sirius XM, 6 to 9 p.m. Eastern Time. Dean, thank you again for dropping by.
Thanks, Tom. Nice chatting with you.
Great talking with you. We'll be back. Welcome back. Tom in Fairfax, California. Hey, Tom, what's on your mind today?
Well, I have two thoughts. You know, I think this whole brouhaha about Trump wishing he had Nazi generals like Hitler's it's based on a big misunderstanding. And what he actually said was that he admired Hitler's genitals, not his generals.
Well, except that Hitler only had one testicle. I mean, you know.
Well, did Hitler play golf? I don't know. You know, Castro did, but maybe. And I was wondering, is there any truth to the rumor that Wharton's Board of Regents is going to rescind Trump's business degree? Because apparently they're very worried that the reputation is going to take a major hit.
Yeah.
After that,
dream on, Tom. Dream on.
Yeah. Well, he made it pretty clear that he had no understanding of even the basic economic concepts, let alone how to run a business. So anyway,
I'm with you. Okay, Tom, thank you.
All right.
That was a good one. That was, you know, a good joke. Thank you. Holly in Washington, D.C. Hey, Holly, what's up?
Hey, I just wanted to add a little to the conversation about QMB, which is the qualified medical beneficiary that was brought up by a prior caller.
In Michigan, in New York State.
Yeah. So what I do know about it is if you qualified for Medicaid in the state you're in, you can qualify for QMB once you get forced to go on Medicare.
That's 65.
And Medicare is a worse program than Medicaid. But the thing is, the means testing in most states is income and asset value. And the asset value disqualifies most people.
Is that the case with this program in New York State?
I would assume it's so. It's not. So the asset value
Ziggy suggested it was purely income dependent.
It's dependent on where you are. So I'm not negating what he's saying. I'm just for your general audience that there's two means testing. One is income. And most people, a lot of people qualify, and income is what you report on your tax return, not just Social Security. So if you have interest income, so there's another factor.
No, I get
and then depending on the territory you live, the asset value matters. So in D.C., it's not a factor. In California, it is. It's like $9,000. And for me personally, because I have more assets and income, I qualify here. And the difference between if I had to go on a 20% gap plan is about $400 or $500 just in premium differential.
You qualify for what?
To qualify for a QMB.
Oh, you have those in Washington, D.C. too?
It's a federal program, which is an extension of Medicaid.
Oh, really? So, because Ziggy was presenting this as something that Kathy Hochul did in New York State.
She might have lifted the asset value metric off of the qualifications, but it's not universally true.
Interesting.
And that's what I just wanted to share. And it makes just a difference in what state you live in, or what. Yeah.
Right. So if you're going to pursue that, check out how your state administers that and what the deal is. Holly, thank you. Thank you for the cautionary note, and also for again mentioning the program. It's great. Appreciate the call. 22 minutes past the hour. I'll be back with you in 60 seconds. Stay with us. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Everybody's all excited about how Kamala Harris and Tim Walz are doing so well in the polls, and there's so much energy around the Democratic candidacy, and that's great. And we need to keep that up. And Trump seems to be going down in flames, the fat Elvis phase of his life or his career. But it's important to realize that over $6 billion has been raised so far in dark money from mostly right-wing billionaires and big corporations, and none of it has been spent yet. September, October, it's coming. There's a tsunami of dark money coming, and we need to get ready for it. And the big way to get ready for it is to double down on registering people to vote, phone banking, sending out postcards, talking to neighbors and friends, getting the word out, because it's gonna come down to people. It's going to come down to people power. There's a whole article about this called "Will Democracy Survive the Tsunami of Dark Right-Wing Money Coming This Fall?" over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out.
You're a pain in the butt.
Back 24 minutes past the hour, and this is very strange. There's a MAGA pastor out here who is saying, Joel Webbin, who's saying that like a golden ring in the snout of a pig, so too is it with a woman who is not modest. Check this out. Here's a clip of him talking about repealing the 19th Amendment, which gave women the right to vote.
The reason why I have grown to despise democracy is because it's not we the people. It's we the some people. And who are those people? Non-elected officials. Like what democracy, what it lends its strength to is, instead of having elected officials that have power, is a raw universal, because that's what we have, is a universal democracy. Everyone is allowed to vote. Right. Everyone. And just for the record, I think the 19th Amendment should be repealed. I think that because, well, first and foremost, because I'm a Christian, and that is the Christian position. Oh my gosh, you're saying that? Yes, that is the Christian position, is that households should not be divided against one another. So it's not just elevating a male vote. By repealing the 19th Amendment, just for the record, it's not just trying to take away a female vote, but it's trying to say, no, there's a family vote. Right. There's a household, and it's like, well, where do women get their voice? Where women get their voice is from their father, from their husband. If they're not married, it's from their father. If they're not married and their father is dead, it's from their brother, it's from their uncle, it's the men in their lives that love them.
Yeah. There you go. This is the future of the Republican Party. In fact, this guy is sometimes heralded as the future of the Republican Party. The next question that I would ask him is, do you think that a woman should run for president? I think the answer is fairly obvious. No, she should be home making dinner for her husband, is what he would say. But this is actually a widespread belief among the Christian nationalist movement. And not just them. I mean, remember, Amy Coney Barrett grew up in a Catholic cult called People of Praise, where she was referred to her entire, growing up life, pre-adult life, as a handmaiden. They literally referred to the women in this Catholic cult as handmaidens. So, here we are. So what's on your mind? I'll pick up your calls on the other side of the break. Stay with us. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, speaking the truths that Trump, Vance, and the whole bunch of them were just as soon you didn't know. I'll be right back with
you. You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We'll be right back with your calls. Please stay with us. Today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Decadent Society, How We Became the Victims of Our Own Success by Russ Douthat, a New York Times columnist. And this is from, it's about the middle of his first chapter. This is a subchapter titled The Limits of Neoliberalism. There's no shortage of theories to explain this great stagnation, to borrow a phrase from one of the theorizers, the George Mason University economist Tyler Cowen. And there's also no need to simply choose between them. Like most broad trends, the economic decadence of the developed world is overdetermined, and almost every serious attempt at explanation will contain some element of truth. The most politically appealing theories, the ones animating our populist and socialist insurgencies, tend to blame neoliberalism itself, claiming that the medicine for 1970s stagflation has proven to be poisonous in large doses. The push for ever freer trade has hollowed out Western economies, the argument goes, offshoring productive industries and killing decent jobs, making financiers and knowledge workers rich while the middle class shrinks steadily. Meanwhile, low tax rates intended to spur investment have enabled the rich to keep more of their gains while starving the programs required to protect the poor and boost the working classes. Antitrust policy has become so fixated on the so-called benefits of consolidation, lower prices for consumers, that it has ignored all the ways that market-dominant corporations can warp policies and strangle innovation. And anti-inflationary policies, forged to counteract a crisis that's now generations behind us, have been adopted as a dogma that's now by the West's financial and political elite, which demands fiscal austerity under every circumstance and deprives struggling economies of the cash they need to grow. You don't have to accept every aspect of this argument, and indeed the populists of the left and right disagree about which aspects to stress, to see that it describes a real phenomenon, perhaps not the outright failure of neoliberalism, but diminishing returns from some of its preferred policies, and an overconfidence among the Western leadership class that solutions from the 1970s are permanently applicable. On trade, for instance, the general principle that open markets have more winners than losers led policymakers to assume that this would necessarily happen and to overestimate how quickly communities affected by outsourcing would recover and how swiftly other sectors of the economy could compensate. In particular, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology economist David Ittner has argued persuasively that the China shock, the dramatic offshoring that followed Beijing's entrance into the World Trade Organization in 2001, inflicted more economic damage on working-class communities in the United States than many experts anticipated, without generating the compensating growth and job creation expected elsewhere. This is not a knockdown case against free trade, just a case against overconfidence in its incautious application. And the same argument applies to other features of the neoliberal program. It's quite possible that lower tax rates spur growth and innovation when tax rates are cut from 70% highs, but also that a program of permanent upper bracket tax cutting, as practiced by America's Republican Party, won't produce the hoped-for spillover effects among the bottom 95%. It's possible that the initial economic insight that some corporate consolidation could be good for consumers was useful for antitrust decision-making in the 1970s and 80s, but needs to be corrected as monopolies regather. It's possible that a program of deficit reduction and tight money that makes sense when inflation is galloping doesn't make sense when we're closer to deflation. The countries sometimes need a loose monetary policy to fight stagnation, and having a financial overclass too fixated on the perils of a for-now imaginary inflation is a recipe for permanently lower growth. Then, alongside this brief against an overextended neoliberalism, there's a more subtle argument pushed by the more serious sort. I think I skipped a page here. Sort of liberalism that the neoliberal program hasn't so much pushed too far as pushed in the wrong direction. In this argument, we don't need less deregulation, but a different kind than we have, because incumbents and insiders in the West have captured the sprawling regulatory state and used it to freeze out potential competition. The age of stagnation, according to this theory, is the fruit of what Brink Lindsay of the Niskenson Institute and Stephen Tellez of Johns Hopkins University describe as a captured economy, in which everything from land use rules to exclusionary zoning to occupational licensing to ever-expanding intellectual property protections to corporate subsidies and tax breaks all converge to create a system that's basically the worst of socialism and the worst of capitalism conjoined: plutocratic and sclerotic, overregulated and undertaxed, with an upper class enriching itself off rents rather than innovation, and a service class that can't advance beyond its station. The overlap between this more libertarian argument and the left-wing critique of neoliberalism is apparent in one of the texts of the post-financial crisis left, French economist Thomas Piketty's 2013 tome Capital in the 21st Century, which mined centuries worth of statistics to argue that capitalism inherently makes the rich richer because returns on capital will always be higher than simple economic growth unless some powerful force intervenes. The forces that intervened in the 20th century were the Great Depression and two world world wars, which not only provided the impetus for massive government interventions, but destroyed outright a great deal of capitalist wealth. The book is The Decadent Society by Russ Douthat. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. Our podcast, The Hartmann Report, is absolutely free and available wherever fine podcasts are available. And the entire 3-hour podcast is available over at thomhartmann.com. They called it blood libel. Food. What the Germans were doing against the Jews, claiming that they were using the blood of Christian children to make their matzah. We've got a new blood libel now here in the United States. J.D. Vance and Donald Trump lying through their teeth, arguing that black Haitian immigrants to the United States, legal immigrants with green cards in this little town in Ohio, are eating pets. This is another libel that goes way. People were claiming German and Dutch immigrants were eating pets. Then they claimed in the 1880s, and actually as recently as last year, a restaurant got shut down in California because of claims that they were serving pets. They weren't. It was an Asian restaurant. This is just evil stuff. These lies and spreading this kind of hate. And this is now the strategy that the Republicans are using. There's a whole article about it at HartmannReport.com. Hate as a political weapon. Check it out.
In the shadows of the old South's ghost, a new plan emerges, who'll pay the cost. Keeping folks on the edge of poverty's line, a permanent underclass by design.
Welcome back. 35 minutes past the hour. On the line with us is our buddy Phil Ittner, the veteran war correspondent based out of Kyiv, Ukraine, host of a podcast called On the Edge. You can find wherever fine podcasts are available. He also has a video blog over on YouTube. Phil, welcome back to the program. I understand that North Korea is sending absolutely bloodthirsty, crazed soldiers to attack Ukrainians. Do I have that right?
According to the U.S. Intelligence sources, approximately some 12,000 soldiers from the DPRK, not their large conscript army, but their more special forces, are reportedly inside Ukraine, which, of course, expands the scope of this conflict significantly. Already, Seoul and the Republic of Korea is saying that if the DPRK is going to become actively involved in Ukraine, that they may also become involved in terms of supplying Ukraine with weaponry. And that would be potentially a pretty significant move, because on the peninsula, as you may or may not know, there's a lot of emphasis on artillery. Should there ever be an open conflict, again, between the DPRK and the ROK. And so they have a lot of artillery shells that they could supply to Ukraine, which has been a major issue in the past.
That's interesting, but we haven't heard a final decision on that.
We have not heard. We haven't heard a final decision from Seoul. It's pretty much 99% confirmed that there are DPRK soldiers inside Ukraine. We've seen videos of them being supplied with Russian weapons and uniforms and cold weather kit and things like that. Unconfirmed video, but still video that's been put out by Russian sources, mill bloggers and the like. And then, of course, this recent statement by U.S. intelligence saying that, yes, it does look like that Pyongyang has sent soldiers. And this, along with Iranian drones, this is just making the Ukrainian conflict, the longer it goes on, spreading out into, more than just isolated within Ukraine itself. And it's also, worth noting that if Russia was winning, why would it be recruiting 12,000 and possibly more DPRK soldiers? Right. So in some ways, it's also being looked on as a confession by Moscow that things aren't going the way they had hoped.
Which brings up the larger question, and I know that you have your finger on the pulse of what's going on in Ukraine. I realize you're not there right now, but Pretty much that's where you
Well,
live.
I'm participating in democracy, Tom, so I'm not going to miss this election.
Yeah, so you came back home to vote. I get it.
Indeed, I did.
God bless you. But you know, given your sources and what you know is going on in Ukraine, what is the state of the war this week?
Still relatively static. I haven't seen any major changes. There is some concern that these DPRK soldiers may be put into the front line in Kursk, which is that part of Russian territory that Ukraine kind of infiltrated into. It's been a thorn in Vladimir Putin's side. So if the DPRK soldiers are allocated there, no 12,000 soldiers are going to make a complete difference. This would be another group like the Chechen Kadyrovs or the Wagner people. This is just another ancillary unit that will be added to Russia's armed forces. But, you know, there is definitely a push to attack Ukrainian forces inside Kursk, because the longer that goes on, of course, the more stress and pressure apparently Vladimir Putin is getting from his own, defense advisors and his kind of inner circle when it comes to, Ukrainian troops being inside Russia.
Remind us what or where Kursk is and why this matters.
Kursk is actually an oblast, which is a state or a province, just that's the term they use for it, internally inside the Russian Federation. So just on the other side of the border from a place called Sumy in Ukraine. And what is it now? 2 months approximately more, actually, I should think. It all kind of blurs together. But a while ago, in a brazen move, Ukrainian troops crossed over the border into Russian proper, and they've been there ever since. And they're even taking up, civil society things, handing out pensions and, making sure people are, have food and things like that. It is almost like they've annexed an entire section of Russia. And for the most part, Vladimir Putin has let this, continue. He's either let it continue or he's unable to stop it. Either way, those troops have still been there for quite some time now. The thinking is that he is still fixated on a section of Ukraine proper called the Donbass, which creates a land bridge to this peninsula, Crimea, which is what we're going to. I'm still producing. I've got some episodes of On the Edge in the bank, as it were, that I left in Kiev, and that's what we're going to be talking about this Sunday, is the importance of Crimea. And it is thought that Putin may not be responding to Kursk because he is so fixated and laser focused on making sure that he gets Ukrainian territory inside Ukraine proper that will create a land bridge to this peninsula, which the Russians have been trying to colonize for hundreds of years, and where one of their major naval bases is. So Putin may be biding his time when it comes to that Ukrainian invasion into his territory so that he can complete the Russian invasion into Ukrainian territory, which would stabilize Crimea.
Do you think that the introduction of North Korean troops into the Kursk region will help Putin recover that from Ukraine? Can drive the Ukrainians back out?
These are pretty hardened soldiers. These are the kind of the cream of the crop of what Pyongyang has to send. Again, I don't think any one group of 12,000 soldiers, whether or not it's the Chechens or the Wagner group, is going to be decisive in any battle in Ukraine. But, you don't like to see it, for sure. Yeah. And Kursk has been under pressure recently steadily, but there's not been any kind of dramatic and overarching offensive into Kursk yet. It's been a slow movement of lines. Ukraine setting up defenses there. So, there are now, in effect, 2, if not 3, we haven't talked about Kharkiv, front lines in Ukraine. Now, there's the Kursk, there's the Donbass, and then, as I just briefly mentioned there's Kharkiv. But this doesn't, we're going to be going into winter. We're already probably getting into although you're right, I haven't been there in about a week, but I'm betting we're getting close into the muddy season, if not already. That that will slow things down, and then winter will become a slower conflict because the temperature is going to be very, very bad, and digging into kind of frozen earth is very difficult, but it won't stop. The fighting is not going to stop. They don't have a fighting season in Ukraine.
So Biden, a week or so ago, sent a couple $100 million worth of military aid to Ukraine. There was this new announcement about a new delivery of something. And I didn't catch exactly what it was or what the significance of it was. Am I remembering this correctly, Phil?
I think that was the $8 billion that he announced while maybe Zelensky was either here for the. Is that what you're referring to?
Frankly, I'm just not sure. I just remember hearing.
I think this is the $8 billion that was referred to, because there's also been just a recent announcement of a whole bunch of seized assets, of Russian assets that are going to be liquidated and then used to support the Ukrainian war effort. That process is being used both here in the United States, but more notably in Europe. I think you're referring to the $8 billion, which had in it Patriot air defense systems. I think it had more ATACMS. But in recent days, there's been this continued discussion about how far the ATACMS, which is a longer-range missile system, which could reach deeper into Russia, and which America has been restricting, has been limiting. How far they can fire into the Russian Federation. But part of that $8 billion, if we're talking about the same group of monies that Biden released, that did include more of these ATACMS. If we lift the restrictions on how far these things can go, they could reach well into Crimea. They could reach well into Russia's supply lines, into its ammo depots, which has been a fixation for the Ukrainians to try and hit them so that they have less rounds to attack Ukraine. But we're in kind of we're in limbo here a little bit as we run up to the election, because I think there is a grave concern that should something change, should a policy change from the Biden administration, and it goes wrong, say the Ukrainians overstep, and there's some sort of disproportionate response from Russia, which results in some sort of horrible event, whether that's the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant or whether there's Russia uses some sort of illegal weapon. Yeah. That's exactly a tactical nuke. Goodness forbid. That could then be a blowback in the U.S. domestic elections. When I left, not quite a week yet since I left Ukraine, as I was leaving, I was talking to my Ukrainian friends and associates, and they're watching very closely what happens here. And there is a sense, as I left last week, of waiting for the other shoe to drop. Right. This kind of bated breath that they know that their fate is connected to this election. So there's a lot of that going on, and I don't see any kind of change in U.S. policy regarding what the Ukrainians can use to attack deeper into Russia until after the election.
Yeah, I get it.
Because that means more Ukrainian dead.
Right. And that'll be at least another 2 weeks, and maybe far. I mean, the 2000 election wasn't resolved until January. Phil Ittner, check out his On the Edge podcast, where fine podcasts are available. Phil, great talking with you again. Thank you so much for being available to us. Appreciate it.
All right, of course. Anytime, Tom.
Thank you, Phil. We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls in just a moment.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archive.
Well, in fact, specifically, I'll be picking up your calls in just a second. Stay with us. And welcome back. Rudy hit the right button here. Rudy in Atlanta, Georgia. Hey, Rudy, what's on your mind today?
How we feeling, Tom?
Good. What's up?
Hey, so I'm just passing through Florida, and I'm just doing a comparison from the last time, election time. I think it was 2020. Mm-hmm. Yeah, 2020 and actually just after 2017. You don't see as much Trump paraphernalia, and I've gone through pretty much the heart of Florida.
I'm hearing that from everybody everywhere, Rudy, and I don't know if it's that people are just embarrassed now or if he's actually losing support. What's your sense of it?
Well, it might be an element of both.
Or it could be also that Trump spent all his campaign money on his legal expenses, and or stuck it in his back pocket, and he's just not, coughing up for the signs and things too.
Yeah, well, I don't know, Tom. I think Florida's in play.
I've heard that from more than one source.
Yeah, I'm out of Georgia. My family's already voted. We did early voting, and I'm a truck driver. And I was, I've driven down through Albany, Georgia, Valdosta, and I'm telling you, I've gone down a lot of back roads and leading into Florida. Mm-hmm. I'm just saying because 2020 you saw Trump stickers on the underpass. So I mean,
they were everywhere.
It's a difference. It's a different feel.
Very interesting. Well, Rudy, thank you for the report.
Yeah,
I appreciate it. Thanks so much for calling in and letting us know. And hopefully, it's a good sign. Thank you, Rudy. Joya, Lady of Soul in Los Angeles. Hey, Joya, what's up?
Hi, thank you so much for your Pillar Radio show, Tom.
Thank you.
I do appreciate you, and I am definitely going to add Brian Welch's State of Confusion, his book, to my library. My comment basically has to do with President Biden weeks ago made a statement that was very concerning to me as it relates to this presidential election and the aftermath. In light of what has taken place on January the 6th, and we all know what that's about, should Americans be preparing or anything like that? I just wanted to know your opinion on the aftermath of this election.
Well, I'm not sure what President Biden said that concerns you. Can you tell me?
Well, he made a statement as it related to the mental state of former President Trump, and in light of the fact that, it seems that he's inciting some type of way in which the MAGA movement could possibly engage in some of the activity that took place on January.
The concern about a repeat of January 6th, although in this case it would be at the state level in a half a dozen swing states. I think it's a very real concern, Joya. I agree with President Biden and with you. I think it's a very real concern. Although I suspect that most of this is actually going to be fought in the courts. They're going to do everything they can to get this in front of the Supreme Court in the hopes that the Supreme Court will throw the election to the House of Representatives under the 12th Amendment. And I wouldn't put it past the 6 bought-off Republicans on the Supreme Court to do exactly that. I don't think that violence is going to be what wins the day for Trump. I think it's going to be, if he wins, I think it's going to be something like that. But, God forbid. Joya, thank you for the call. That was a great question. Thank you so much. And have a great day now.
Phone banking and all of that.
There you go. Thank you. 51 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. The MAGA Republicans have a plan for America. It involves something called fascism. It's a 3-step plan, actually, to take over America and turn us into a fascist state. They're following the example of Vladimir Putin in Russia and Viktor Orban in Hungary. Viktor Orban, who is held up by conservatives as the example of how a country should be run. He came to Texas to give a speech to CPAC and got a standing ovation. So the 3 steps. Number 1, take over the electoral systems and basically rig them, along with massive gerrymandering. Number 2, build a fascist base by mobilizing hate against minorities, gender minorities, racial minorities, religious minorities, while merging with one of the large factions of a church. and the billionaires in the country. And number 3, seize control of state power and turn the criminal justice system against your enemies. There's an op-ed about the whole thing over at HartmannReport.com. It's titled, Revealed, the MAGA Republicans' 3-Step Plan for Classic Fascism. Check it out. Welcome back, 53 minutes past the hour. And James in Columbus, Ohio. Hey, James, what's on your mind today?
Tom, running over to the phone. Hey, can you hear me good?
I can hear you just fine. Thanks for listening to WGRN. What's up?
So I'd like to weigh in on the current fascist love fest that we're having here.
Okay.
Real quick, a fascia is a bundle of sticks tied together for resilience. That's the definition I remember.
Yeah.
And so...
And medically, it's a layer under the muscle or around the muscle or something like that. But anyway, it's kind of the same thing. It's a bunch of fibers. Keep going, James.
Correct. A fascist is the twine that binds up all of us sticks.
Mm-hmm.
And so another thing on the fascist thing, there's another lie that Donald Trump tells about Hitler's generals. They didn't really like him. In fact, they did defy him, not often.
They tried to kill him 3 times.
Exactly. They even tried to kill him. So there he goes once again, misinforming people.
Well, or just not even knowing what the hell he's talking about.
And we're talking a lot about armed people standing up in modern times to repressive policies. But I do remember in recent history, there were archers in the streets of Hong Kong fighting for their rights against the police, I think. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But that's just a minor footnote. But my real point on the whole fascist thing is that in Ohio, we got this wannabe oligarch, Bernie Moreno, running for Senate.
Yeah.
And he is way worse than Vance. And if he gets in, man, abortion and Ohio rights, even though we enshrined it in our Ohio Constitution, he's going to find a way to get rid of that.
Yep.
And let me just tell you one thing about this Moreno. His family are Colombian immigrants, and they are taking American homes. In fact, they're one of these schemers that buy up housing and are planning on making billions in the wake of Donald Trump's victory. So my point is that Bernie Moreno is a wannabe oligarch, but he's just going to shortcut straight to fascist if he can.
Yeah, I get it.
Those are my points.
I get it. Okay, good points, James. Thank you. Lawrence in Berkeley. Hey, Lawrence, what's up?
Yeah, hi. Yesterday you had a guy on who was saying that no matter who wins the election, whether Kamala wins or whatnot, the country is going to be run by the oligarchs. It's still going to be run by the billionaires. And in my opinion, and I think the opinion of a lot of other people, they're right. It is going to be run by the billionaires to one extent or another.
Unless we can pass legislation reversing Citizens United, which is what Kamala Harris has promised to do.
Okay, but we didn't have Citizens United when FDR was in power, but it only took 12 years for the Republicans to reverse the labor bill.
Yeah.
The point is that this happens, and I just want to, say, in terms of what you should do mentally in order to deal with this is you have to have a double vision. You have to say, yes, there are going to be reforms. There will be good reforms. They will help a lot of people. And no, they won't be sufficient because you're still leaving the billionaires in power.
Yeah.
But what you have to do, quickly, is that you have to have a long-range vision in addition to your reform vision.
I agree. And I think that's what FDR was trying to set up with his 4 freedoms, before he died, and his second Bill of Rights. I agree with you. Lawrence, thank you very much. Very well said. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the HartmannReport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
Today we're reading from It's Even Worse Than You Think, What the Trump Administration is Doing to America by David K. Johnston. This is from page 61, the chapter titled Forgetting the Forgotten Man. In 2010, the U.S. Department of Labor created a website to honor workers who died on the job. Quote, more than 4,500 workers, lose their lives on the job every year. Below are the names of just a few who have died in recent months. OSHA's mission is to prevent workplace injuries, illnesses, and death, end quote. That Occupational Safety and Health Administration webpage was intended to highlight and humanize workplace deaths, to ensure awareness of tragedies, especially those that could have been avoided, according to Jordan Barab, an Assistant Secretary of Labor during the Obama administration. Barab explained, without information like this, fatality statistics are just raw, sterile numbers. The purpose of adding names and circumstances was to impress people with the tragedy that workers and their families face day after day. In August 2017, Trump's Labor Department quietly removed the preamble and the names when it killed the web page. It also took down, without public announcement, the fatality inspection data for all years prior to 2017. Those were just two of many other Trump administration actions inimical to worker safety. Others included no longer posting press releases about deaths resulting from unsafe working conditions, delaying rules to reduce sickness and death from inhaling silica and beryllium at work, delaying rules to lower the risk of railroad engineers and truck drivers falling asleep at the switch or wheel because of untreated sleep apnea, and the appointment to the Supreme Court of a judge who held that a company had the right to fire a worker who chose not to freeze to death on the job. A reasonable person listening to Donald Trump's inaugural address would never have expected these and other actions, assuming he believed what Trump said. Trump declared, "The forgotten men and women of our country will be forgotten no more. You came by the tens of millions to become part of a historic movement, the likes of which the world has never seen before. At the center of this movement is a crucial conviction that a nation exists to serve its citizens," end quote. Those men and women were forgotten again the following week. And it's not just workers whose interests were forgotten, not to mention who were put in danger. By deciding not to implement a rule to reduce the chances of truck drivers and train operators falling asleep at the wheel, Trump put at risk the lives of families driving along the highway, people riding on passenger trains, and many others. The White House called it President Trump's war on regulation. In his weekly radio address in early May, he declared that we've removed one job-killing regulation after another, and they're not pretty, and they're going. And believe me, we're just getting started on regulations. They're gone. Removal of data on workplace deaths, which averaged 13 per day, infuriated Jordan Barab, who is Obama's number 2 at OSHA. As a private citizen, Barab created a web page to keep track of the names of the dead and the reasons they were killed on the job. He called it OSHA won't tell you who died in the workplace. We will. After the election, Barab's concerns that the Trump administration would be bad for workers increased when he asked where the Trump beachhead team was and learned that none was coming. Each incoming administrator sends people to scope out federal agencies, learn who does what, and get a feel for the place in advance. Then the incoming administration sends its landing team, the people who will initially implement its policies for each agenda, or at each agency. When no beachhead team came up, Barab figured it meant worker safety simply was not a priority for Trump. He hoped that was the worst of it, nothing more than apathy about worker safety. But when the landing team arrived, Barab realized trouble was coming for American workers, and it was not official apathy, but the start of assaults on workers' rights and safety. Barab said most of them had no idea they were going to labor and no interest in workers' issues either. What they did have was a mandate to delay, repeal, or weaken regulations that protected workers as part of Trump's plan to eliminate, quote, any regulation that is outdated, unnecessary, bad for workers, or contrary to the national interest, end quote. The first sign came when Trump nominated Judge Neil Gorsuch to the Supreme Court. Gorsuch was an acolyte of Antonin Scalia, whose seat he would be taking. Like Scalia, he said statutes should be literally read, and if that made no sense, well, that was a problem for Congress. Also like Scalia, he had a habit of consulting dictionaries, often following Scalia's practice of relying on the third, fourth, or even lesser definition of a word when it supported his jurisprudence. Trump's nomination alarmed unions. Jody Calamine, a communications worker of America lawyer, told Gorsuch's Senate confirmation hearing that Gorsuch, quote, is a threat to working people's health and safety, end quote. Calamine cited Gorsuch's dissent in the 2016 case to make his point. That dissent, he said, reveals an anti-worker bias and features the judicial activism that will ultimately put workers' lives at risk, end quote. Those are unusually strong words about a Supreme Court nominee, but a review of the case shows Gorsuch has little regard for human life, at least when it comes to employers' power over their workers. He considers a rigid interpretation of the law more important. The case was about a law Congress passed giving workers the right to refuse dangerous tasks. Gorsuch said, no, you may not refuse. It's even worse than you think, by David K. Johnston.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome to our third hour. There's a new book out that you need to know about, and I'm just so happy I'm going to be able to speak with the author for the next 30 minutes. Craig Unger is the author. He is, and he was the guy, he was on this story from the get-go. But the new book is titled Den of Spies, Reagan, Carter, and the Secret History of the Treason that Stole the White House. Craig, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
So glad to have you with us. CraigUnger.com, by the way, is the website, and Craig Unger, U-N-G-E-R, on Twitter. First of all, let's step back into the Wayback Machine. It's 1979, and the hostages are taken, I believe, on a year before, to the day almost, a year before Election Day of 1980. Am I remembering correctly?
Absolutely. I think it was November 4th, 1979. And it was a real crisis. The entire country, people, I guess a lot of your listeners probably weren't even born, but there were yellow ribbons tied around trees. There were pop songs about that. There was a countdown on the news every night, American held hostage up to, and it went on for 444 days. So it was the central issue of the 1980 presidential campaign. And the key thing was, if Jimmy Carter could bring the hostages home before the election, he would probably win. And if not, he would lose.
Right, and a broad consensus about that, I think, and because Carter had been, in some ways, a very popular president. And then now, if I could just back up a little bit, we know now, since the LBJ files were released, what, about 15 years ago or so, that in 1968, Richard Nixon learned that Johnson and Humphrey had worked out a peace deal with the Vietnamese, both the North and the South, that was supposed to be consummated in Paris. And Nixon's people, Anna Chennault and company, reached out and blew up that deal, offered the South Vietnamese leader apparently a whole pile of money or something if they would blow up the deal, if they'd hold off until after the election. And there's that famous call where LBJ tells Everett Dirksen, you know, they oughtn't to be doing this, Everett, this is treason. And Everett Dirksen, the grand old Republican leader, says, yes, you know, or I agree, or something like that. So this is not the first time that a Republican president or a Republican who wanted to become president employed treason. You know, blew up actual negotiations by a federal government to steal an election. Am I remembering correctly, Craig?
Absolutely. In fact, it's the same issue you see in '68, in 1980, and again today. And people have often cited I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the name of the act, but essentially it's an act of treason to hijack American foreign policy and use it for
the Logan Act?
Yes, and it's never really been used, but it's cited often. It dates back to 1799. Yep. But people haven't been. It's never really been tried in court. And here you have. The first time where, I mean, it's not the first time, but it's they really seized American foreign policy and hijacked it, and in order to prolong the detention of American hostages. And I want people to think about that for a second. The Republican Party, which was not in power, was illegally sending weapons to Iran, and in return, they wanted the hostages to be incarcerated even longer.
Now, this is before the election. This was before Ronald Reagan took office. My recollection is that it was the spare parts for the American military equipment that we had sold to the Shah of Iran, which was now controlled by the Ayatollah. In fact, I think it was tires were being routed through Israel during the election campaign by Republicans. Am I remembering that right, Craig?
Yes, both Israel and Iran relied almost entirely on American military, and especially under the Shah, Iran had a huge military. Mm-hmm. But suddenly they were being attacked by Iraq, and they were running out of spare parts for their F-4 fighter jets, their C-130 cargo planes, and so forth, and the only place they could get them through Israel. And this set up a geostrategic sort of dilemma where Israel wanted Iran armed to fight Iraq. Iraq was attacking Iran, mm-hmm. and there were good strategic reasons for this. But the upshot was that Israel participated in a covert operation to sabotage an American presidential election. And that is just sort of astounding. It's one of those taboo things that has never really appeared in the American press, and writing about it meant that you would get an awful lot of pushback, and that's what happened to me.
Yeah, did Netanyahu or his brother have anything to do with this?
No, they weren't really participating at that stage. Okay. Menachem Begin was the prime minister, and this was not long after the Camp David Accords. And even though that won the Nobel Prize for both Anwar Sadat of Egypt and for Israel. And it's a treaty that has lasted for more than 40 years. Israel was very angry that Jimmy Carter had forced them to give back the Sinai to Egypt. They wanted him out of office. They did not want him reelected. And here they were participating in this covert operation to get rid of him.
Wow, much like AIPAC is participating in American elections right now.
Right.
So you said they essentially took you down. I mean, tell us about what happened to you when you reported on this back in the day, and when was it that you first found out about this and reported on it?
Right. I first got into it in April of 1991, and the New York Times had a wonderful op-ed piece by Gary Sick, who was on Jimmy Carter's National Security Council, and it sort of gave me an outline. So I wrote a 10,000-word article about it for Esquire that was the first major narrative about it in print. Newsweek immediately hired me afterwards to lead their investigation. A number of key people, like former Attorney General Elliot Richardson, were my sources, and Richardson told me, this makes Watergate look like a garden party. And yet, when I got to Newsweek, suddenly everything shifted in reverse, and everything that was reported was unreported. Newsweek did 3 stories in a row saying the October surprise didn't happen, it didn't happen, it didn't happen. And if you know anything about news, if you know anything about journalism, news is when something happens. When something doesn't happen, you generally don't write 3 stories in a row about it. So there was clearly
whitewash.
There really was, and it was a disinformation operation, and Newsweek and the New Republic led the way in shutting it down. Newsweek let me go, and I was actually sued by Reagan's former national security advisor, Bud McFarlane. And in general, almost any reporter who kept following it after that point was labeled a conspiracy theorist.
Yeah, it's absolutely remarkable. The book, we're talking with Craig Unger. His new book is Den of Spies, Reagan, Carter, and the Secret History of the Treason that Stole the White House. Craig, you can stick around for a minute, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. We'll be right back in just a few seconds with Craig Unger. As I said, the book Den of Spies, Reagan, Carter, and the Secret History of the Treason. So nice to see that word being used. I've been using this word to describe this for years, and here Craig has nailed it now. New York Times best-selling novel.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be back with Craig Unger about his new book, Den of Spies, in just a moment. And welcome back. So, Craig, what happened? First of all, let's talk about Bill Casey. Bill Casey, was he the point guy in this thing?
Wonderful, wonderful character. I describe him as sort of a mix between James Bond and Mr. Magoo. He was sort of he mumbled all the time. He spat when he talked. He had horrible table manners. He spilled food all over his tie when he ate. He was known to chew his tie when he got anxious. He was the guy everyone had to invite to state dinners, and everyone hoped he wouldn't show up. And in the end, he wanted to be Secretary of State under Reagan. And Nancy Reagan said, absolutely no way, I do not want him, the State Department being such a formal position. But he was a brilliant, brilliant spy, and he did things in a way where it was all compartmentalized, so no one knew everything that was going on. And he had been a terrific spy in World War II with the Office of Strategic Services, which was the precursor to the CIA. But after that, he was not visibly in the intelligence world. And I think one of my greatest discoveries in writing this book was putting together that he had a secret intelligence network on his own, even before the hostages were seized. And he was in touch with the top people in Israeli intelligence. He was in touch with South African gun runners. He had Republican operatives who were fixers and helped set up meetings for him in Madrid with some of the key Iranian people who had been negotiating against him in the October surprise. And he was an extraordinary figure. And he also thwarted many of the Carter administration's outreaches hostages in terms of when they were trying to solve the hostage crisis.
Now, Barbara Honegger, in her book October Surprise, says that he had told his lawyer, Milton Gould, that he was going to fully testify about this, and that the day that he was supposed to testify, he had a seizure in his office in the CIA, was taken to Bethesda, and the part of his brain that controls speech was removed. Is that accurate?
Wow, I have not been able to verify that. He was, his congressional testimony is sort of comical, really, because he mumbles so much, and they'd ask him a question, and he'd say, and Ronald Reagan famously was asked about Casey and said, I can't understand a word he says. You can ask him to repeat himself once or twice, but you can't ask a third time. That's rude. So Reagan just nodded and smiled and seemed to go along with things.
But Casey was involved in working with the Iranians to hold the hostages.
Absolutely.
Wasn't Casey a campaign manager for Reagan?
Yes, and I mean, that's what's so extraordinary. If you can imagine running a presidential campaign, a winning one at that, that's a full-time job. That's 24/7, and you're in the media spotlight the whole time. But Casey managed to sneak away to Europe, to have dozens of meetings with arms dealers who were selling weapons to Iran, and he had his own cutouts, that is, intermediaries who would do his work for him.
Amazing stuff. Amazing stuff. Craig, we've got a 1-minute break here. I've got to read a commercial over on the commercial side of the program, so we'll be back in about 60 seconds, maybe 70 seconds, okay?
Great.
We'll be right back. Stay tuned. Party in Hungary. That party was sort of like the Republican Party. It was just a conventional conservative European political party. And he has turned it into a neo-fascist powerhouse. He pushed through he altered the nation's constitution to push through what we would call gerrymandering and voter suppression so that his party will always win. He campaigned on building a wall. Build a wall was literally one of his campaign slogans, and he did build a wall across the southern border of Hungary to keep out Syrian refugees who were fleeing the violence when Russia was bombing that country. His other two campaign slogans were, and I quote, "Restore Christian purity and make Hungary great again." Seriously, back in 2010, 6 years before Trump. There's an amazing backstory about how Viktor Orban is being cloned, essentially, in the GOP. You can find the article over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out.
They say he's from the hills, but the truth ain't.
Spies, Reagan, Carter, and the secret history of the treason that stole the White House. Craig and I were just talking about Bill Casey, who Reagan put in charge of the CIA. But he was in charge of Reagan's campaign in 1980, and he was right up to his eyeballs in working with the Iranians to hold the hostages, and thus deny Carter the presidency. Craig, what happened next? Well, actually, we've got about 5 minutes here. I want to get through all this, but I also want to, I want to know what do we do about this now? In retrospect, is there any chance that any of this is going to break through, or that the Democrats will start talking about this?
Well, my hope is that Americans finally come to terms with this. I mean, it's we as a country, I think, rarely, we're always in denial about the dark parts of our history. And this is something we've denied. It goes back to the origins of America, I think. And for me, it was very personal in a way that this country doesn't accept its dark parts. When I was a child, I had my first trip to Europe, and my father took me to Germany. He took me to the the concentration camps. I went to Dachau. And when you go there, you see that it's really a monument to the victims. They're honoring the victims. I was just around 13 or 14 then when I went there, and I came back to the United States, and I went on a Texas history trip. I was from Dallas, and we went to the Alamo. And when I got to the Alamo, I realized it wasn't until many, many years later, I realized it was a completely different story than when been told. The Alamo was not about the heroics of Davy Crockett and so forth. It was really a battle for slavery. At the time, Texas was a province in Mexico. Mexico had just abandoned slavery. And the Alamo is a battle for the slave owners to be able to continue to engage in the slave trade. And I think America has long had that problem. There are Confederate flags at Trump rallies. That's really the equivalent of swastikas.
Yeah. I thought this was going to break through, what was it, last year or the year before, when Ben Barnes, who was the former lieutenant governor of the state of Texas, told the New York Times that he was on one of these flights to Paris where the Iranian deal, the deal to hold the hostages, was apparently being put together.
Right. I mean, they're bits and pieces which only make sense if the October surprise took place. Right. And I think I can finally put to rest any doubts about it, because I actually have the receipts, and I have in the book printed copies of invoices of weapons that were traded by political operatives of Bill Casey, and they ended up in Iran. And they got all the way to the president of Iran, who delivered those receipts to the House of Representatives, which was investigating it. But they just filed them away, put them in cardboard boxes in an abandoned store, a ladies' room, in a Capitol Hill office. Right. And a colleague of mine, Bob Perry, actually found them under the tampon dispenser, but they haven't really surfaced until now.
So here, I'm sorry, finish it.
That should give you a sign of how much of a whitewash the congressional investigation was.
Right. So here we have Richard Nixon committing treason with the Vietnamese to win the election, followed by Ronald Reagan committing treason with Iran to win the election, followed by George W. Bush being put into office by the Supreme Court because Catherine Harris had refused to count 45,000 ballots for Al Gore, and then Donald Trump coming into office with help from Russia. It seems to me like the last legitimate Republican president we had was Dwight Eisenhower. Is that a message that America is ready to accept?
Well, we haven't accepted it in full, and we have to start doing that, I think. And if I want to criticize the Democrats, it's for being lapdogs. It's for not enforcing it enough. We have to have oversight.
Yeah, they should be raising hell about this. We're talking with Craig Unger. The book is Den of Spies, Reagan, Carter, and the Secret History of the Treason that Stole the White House. Will there be any congressional inquiries? Have you spoken with anybody on Capitol Hill? Has anybody evidenced any interest in reviving this?
I think it's too far in the past right now, and certainly the Democrats don't control Congress now. Yeah, they can't do that.
Well, they have the Senate.
Yeah. I don't think they have the appetite for it right now, and they've got their hands full fighting off Trump right now.
Right. So I just have about 30 seconds here left. The president of Iran at the time, in 1980, came to the United States and told the Christian Science Monitor, yeah, we did this with Reagan. Am I right?
Right. Well, I spoke to President Bani Sadr, who was living in exile in France, and in many ways it was a double coup d'etat. Not just Jimmy Carter was forced out of office. I mean, he lost the election partly as a result of that, and the same happened in Iran, where President Bani Sadr survived 3 assassination attempts and finally fled the country. So this works both ways, and it's also important that the Republicans were making an alliance with the hardliners, the really tough, theocratic Iranian fundamentalists, not the secular Democrats.
Craig, we're out of time. Den of Spies is the book. It's brilliant. Craig Unger, the author. Craig, thanks so much.
Thank you, Tom.
Great talking with you.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Well, that's a hell of a story. I'll pick up your calls on the other side of the break. Stay with us. Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from America's Battle for Media Democracy, The Triumph of Corporate Libertarianism and the Future of Media Reform by Victor Pickard. This is from the chapter number 4, page 98. It's titled The Origins of the Fairness Doctrine. Barely a year had passed since the Blue Book controversy when similar conflicts over public interest regulation re-emerged. This round of contentious debates centered on whether to repeal the Mayflower Doctrine, which prohibited broadcasters from editorializing politically. Broadcasters' growing political power emboldened them to challenge the Larry Fly-era FCC decision, which would spark the last major radio reform battle of the 1940s. Fearing a further commercialized, conservative-biased, corporate-dominated medium should broadcasters gain the right to editorialize, many progressives saw at stake, as one news article put it, the future of radio as an instrument of service to the people. Reformers marshaled considerable support from the still intact coalition from the Blue Book debates to rally for the Mayflower decision's preservation. Similar to those debates, broadcasters attacked the reformers' position with First Amendment rights arguments that aimed to delegitimize the FCC's regulatory power over broadcast programming. This episode involved a number of ironies. Most notably, the controversial rule that later became known as the Fairness Doctrine, which to this day is often invoked by progressives as the high watermark of enlightened media policy, actually came about as a kind of consolation prize for post-war liberals who had advocated stricter regulation. The following chapter recovers this forgotten history. In doing so, it lays bare a number of early tensions and contradictions that closed out a decade of contentious policy debates around normative understandings of media's democratic role. This history throws into sharp relief several significant parallels and connections to 21st century media challenges, particularly around the question of whether government has any affirmative regulatory authority over media. Toward the end of the 1940s, progressive forces were in disarray. The remains of the Popular Front, including many New Deal liberals, were largely disintegrated, especially after the Progressive Party's disastrous loss in the 1948 election. What had been a rising social democratic challenge was now widely seen as dangerously socialistic, even in its diminished state. With the communist witch hunt in full swing, the broadcast industry exploited Cold War politics to discredit reformers by claiming that the reformers' real agenda was to destroy free radio. J. Edgar Hoover harassed the FCC on a regular basis with letters and unsolicited reports on subversive broadcasters. And the FCC's actions were aggressively scrutinized as Congress and the FBI put the commission on notice for a number of unofficial investigations. Writing to Larry Fly, this is the FCC commissioner, about the endless red baiting, Clifford Durr confided, "When I read of the present plans to protect the country against the dangerous thinking of us bureaucrats, I'm inclined to look back with nostalgia on the days when the commission stood more or less firmly against our friend J. Edgar." By the late 1940s, the FCC's more progressive wing, aside from Durr, had become more passive on issues related to regulatory oversight of broadcasting programming. The tide clearly had turned in the favor of the commercial broadcasters. Rendering the landscape even less hospitable for media reform, the industry attacks against the FCC coincided with an increasingly right-wing tilt in D.C. politics. Even before the 1948 presidential election, liberals were in various states of retreat. FDR had died, the New Deal agenda lay in tatters, and Republicans were coming off a congressional sweep in the 1946 midterm elections. The Democrats would regain some ground electorally by taking back Congress in '48, but the ideological shift was more permanent. During his campaign, President Truman characterized 1948 as the decisive year of the challenge, with a primary choice between, quote, between a parcel labeled progressive liberalism and a parcel labeled reactionary conservatism, end quote. However, Truman's liberalism often proved to be largely rhetorical. After he eked out a victory in a four-way race, his administration quickly shied away from the previous administration's aggressive liberalism, ever mindful of Southern conservative Democrats and Republicans nipping at their flanks. Truman's market-friendly orientation led him to espouse commercial broadcasters' policy positions. Invoking his support for the, quote, American system, end quote, of broadcasting, he insisted in an open letter to Broadcasting Magazine's Sol Taishoff that, quote, America, as the birthplace of radio, should have a free, competitive system, unfettered by artificial barriers and regulated only as to the laws of nature and the limitation of facilities, end quote. Deferring to the laws of the market, Truman ordered, is, quote, preferred over rigid government regulation of a medium that by its very nature must be maintained as free as the press, end quote. The same issue of broadcasting contained an editorial amplifying Truman's message to the FCC that regulation was to be off the table. A similar statement followed 10 months later, with Broadcasting triumphantly announcing that Truman, quote, emphatically reaffirmed his belief in completely free radio, end quote, which according to the editors translated into, quote, a declaration on behalf of a broadcasting system unshackled by un-American regulations, end quote. It's amazing. America's battle for media democracy.
Help support progressive radio. If you're listening to us on a commercial station, call their advertisers and let them know you're listening. If you're listening to us on Pacifica, or one of our many nonprofit stations, please support them when they do their fundraising drives. Thanks for supporting progressive talk radio, and tag you're it. It's no coincidence that the time in Europe when the church ran the continent, from around the 5th century to around the 15th or 16th century, that 1,000-year period is referred to age. This is what happens when religion controls politics, when religion controls the state, the nation, and every nation of Europe was controlled essentially by the Catholic Church during that period of time. It got busted up with the Protestant Reformation in the 16th century. This was what the founders of this country very much knew about. George Washington refused to declare himself a Christian. Thomas Paine wrote an entire book embracing atheism. Ben Franklin fled Massachusetts as a teenager to escape the religious threats. And Thomas Jefferson went off on it regularly. There's a whole piece about how the Republicans are trying to impose a new dark age on America. It's all laid out, all the quotes and all the links over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out.
A caller rang and asked a question so bold. Is Trump the Antichrist, the one of old? The lines lit up as people chimed in with tales of darkness. Where does it begin? Is he the beast, the one from the past, or just a man whose evil won't last? By his fruits the truth will be shown. Is Trump the Antichrist, or just flesh and bone?
Whatever. Anyhow, welcome back. Picking up your calls here, Bob in Gloucester, Maryland. Hey, Bob, what's up?
How you doing, Tom? I'm not looking forward to when you retire. The question I have is I've been playing with the electoral map. So, what do you think Harris's path to victory is if she loses Michigan? Which, unfortunately, I believe she's going to lose Michigan
because of the war in Gaza.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like if you saw her CNN interview,
I did,
and then her comments after Sinwar was killed. They were both reprehensible. So they're not. I think, and I don't know if you saw the Harris campaign kicked out a Muslim representative at one of.
I know they apologized to him after the fact, but I get it. I believe that Netanyahu and Trump are working together to sabotage, the Biden campaign, and Biden, I agree.
On that comment,
very
sure, I agree with you, but the Harris campaign isn't doing itself any favors.
I know. So anyway, if she loses Michigan,
Bob, I'm sorry, I'm not I'm not Steve Kornacki. I don't do all the numbers on all the states and game out all the opportunities or options. So I can't answer your question. I don't know the answer to the question.
Oh, okay, then that's fine. I mean, well, what's your opinion on Michael Moore's assessment that she will still win? Like he's more iffy about it, but he thinks that she can make up the numbers elsewhere in Michigan.
I think so too. I think that my sense of it is that everybody is underestimating over 100 million pissed off women, and that
I agree with you on that.
The Dobbs decision is a much bigger factor in this election than anybody's giving it credit for, but we'll find out probably 2 weeks from today. So what can you do?
All right. Well,
Bob, thanks a lot.
Thank you for taking my call.
Yeah, sure. Good talking to you. Mark in San Francisco. Hey, Mark, what's up?
Oh, Tom, it's Social Security. I really hope that the Democrats come out big on Social Security, that the Republicans want to end it, and they want to defund it. And I think if they do it in states like Florida, Arizona, Nevada, I think it's a big issue.
Well, Trump has a plan to break Social Security in 6 years. I mean, he has already proposed things that will defund Social Security within 6 years.
Yeah, and I think the Democrats should be screaming about it. Not only that, but the thing is, our young people don't understand that that's their Social Security safety net if they get hurt on the job. And I think they should tell these young people that, if you get hurt on the job, Social Security is your safety net. And I just think they need to hammer this home.
Yeah, that's something that most young people have no idea of, is that the Social Security Disability Program, you can't buy that kind of insurance, or maybe you could, but it would cost a fortune, where if you are disabled, I mean, this happened to one of my closest friends, Michael Hutchison. He's passed away now, but 15, 20 years ago, something like that, Michael was living in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and he was out jogging on a morning where they had a little bit of snow or some serious frost. He was going over a bridge that had a low, guardrail on it, and he slipped and fell into this river and broke his neck. And he was paralyzed from the neck down for the rest of his life. And it was Social Security, and he was in his 50s when this happened. And it was Social Security that kept him alive. It was Social Security that paid his rent, paid his bills. I mean, everything. And people just don't know that they've got that available to them.
No, and especially the young people. My sister is schizophrenia, and she worked as long as she could, but she's got Social Security disability.
Exactly.
She worked till she was in her 50s, but it's a devastating illness. And, I just think that young people need to understand that they could lose this safety net, and they may need it because, if you don't have it, what are you going to do?
I agree.
Eat out of a dumpster?
Yep.
I mean, it's really important.
I totally get it. I have a nephew who's in the same position as your sister, and, I totally get it. Mark, thank you for the call, and thanks for pointing that out. It's something that needs to be said more frequently. Dak in Los Angeles. Hey, Dak, what's up?
Hi. Well, called your program a long time ago on the brunch for Bernie thing, and I don't know if you recall, asked a question of Bernie Sanders if he would support the option to vote against someone, and unfortunately my question got misunderstood. But, time has passed, and we still do have problems with our elections, but not the problems Trump's been saying. It's not the voters.
I'm listening.
Are you still there?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, here's the thing. The system that we have, this first-past-the-post system, it is effectively a degenerate form of ranked choice voting. It's ranked choice voting with only one rank allowed. If we remove the restriction that says vote for only one, though, we don't end up with ranked choice voting. If we just remove that restriction, we're already counting the votes in a way that would allow multiple votes in the same election to be counted, and we end up with an approval voting system. We could also, in addition to that, give people the option that if they don't find anyone at all they want to cast their vote of support for, they could actually cast a single disapproval vote and have that in the end subtracted from the net vote count. So there would be a record of, this many votes cast in approval and this many votes cast
I get
in
it. Those are two of probably a dozen different voting systems that, are debated at length. But the simple reality is we're either going to have, on a state-by-state, city-by-city basis,
ranked choice voting or first past the post winner take all voting, because I guess New York State had fusion voting. It still does, I believe. But that never caught on anywhere outside of New York State, and that dates back to the 19th century. So it's an interesting conversation, Dak, but it's purely an intellectual conversation. It's a rhetorical exercise here. Nobody is seriously proposing this.
But some changes could be made at the federal level.
They could be, but in order to make that happen, you're going to have to get one or both of the political parties in favor of it, and or at least a handful of politicians, and none of them are.
I'm well aware, and I'm hoping they might be hearing your program, and maybe they'll go ahead and do that. I mean, if Kamala really wants to get a whole bunch more votes, that would be a good way to do it, is say, hey, look, there is something wrong there, and it's not what the opponent's been claiming, and we can fix it.
I got it. Dak, thanks for the call. Tom in Columbus, Ohio. Hey, Tom, what's up?
Hey, Tom, let me give you a little good news. Can you hear the dam breaking? Today, the mayor of Oklahoma City came out and basically endorsed Kamala Harris.
I know.
He wouldn't even give her by the name. The mayor of Waukesha, Wisconsin,
another Republican,
has Fred Upton, who's like 30-year Republican congressman from very red Southwest Michigan, has endorsed Kamala Harris.
Dick
Susan
friggin'
Ford,
Cheney, and is voting for her.
Yeah, but Susan Ford has come out and endorsed it.
Yeah,
there is going to be a tidal wave of people coming out.
I think so too. I think so too. I keep saying I think this is going to be a blowout, and I know that the polls defy that, and the pundits defy that, and the media continues to say, "Oh no, it's a horse race, it's a horse race," and maybe it is. I don't know. I was caught flat-footed in 2016. Or surprised, shall we say, when the Russians and Jill Stein helped Donald Trump become president. I didn't expect it, but I think you're right.
The Russians use the Electoral College.
Yeah, well, that's what they're trying to do right now. I mean, the Russians are trying to do it again.
Absolutely, but I'm seeing a blowout.
I think you're right.
Awesome.
I think you're right. But please, anybody listening, don't take that to the bank. Go vote. Tom, thank you. It's 44 minutes and a half past the hour. I'll be back with more of your calls in just a minute.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be right back with more of your calls in just a moment. Stay tuned. And welcome back. Is it Marianne or Marian? I'm not sure how to pronounce it based on how it's spelled.
My name is Marion.
Oh, Marion.
I'm a first-time caller from the village of Cobden in southern Illinois, but a long-time listener with my daughter Sarah to your show.
Well, thank you, Marion.
We met you recently, Tom, at your book signing in Darien, Illinois on October the 9th.
Oh, sweet. Well, thank you for calling.
I was the 91-year-old woman who told you and Richard Chu that I became an American citizen at the age of 84 so that I could vote against Trump in 2016.
I remember.
You remember?
I do. Okay. I remember it well.
Okay. But today I've been reflecting on your earlier discussion of Trump's fascist tendencies. Mm-hmm. Because you know how old I am. I was born in 1932. I grew up in England during World War II and experienced firsthand the damage that Hitler and the Nazis did to my country and Europe. Mm-hmm. The parallels to today are clear. The signs are here. People please vote against Trump to save this country and the world. On this subject, one of the best articles I have read that explains Trump's dangerous character is in the current New Yorker, dated October 21st. It's written by Adam Gopnik, and it's called As Bad as All That, Donald Trump and the Unmaking of America. I do recommend this article very seriously to anybody, but of course you might say, well, anybody who reads the New Yorker is going to vote for Harris, but maybe it would change somebody's mind. I just want to end on a lighter note. Did you know that Trump is the first president since Taft not to own a pet while in the White House?
I didn't know it was the first president since Taft. I thought he might be the first president
has Trump ever owned a pet?
Not to the best of my knowledge. He's a germaphobe.
What a reflection, another reflection on his character.
Yeah.
I am going out this afternoon, and I'm going to vote for Kamala Harris. And please, people, please follow my example.
Yeah.
Your earlier caller was quite optimistic. I am not, but what can we do but vote?
I completely agree, Marion. I have about 15 seconds here. What is the major thing that Trump is doing that causes you to think that he resembles Hitler?
That makes me laugh. What does he say that doesn't make me think he resembles Hitler? And it's the atmosphere of the country. It's not just what Trump is. And probably maybe the only book Trump has ever read is Mein Kampf.
Yeah, there is some evidence of that, at least according to his first wife, who conveniently fell down some stairs and is now buried in his golf course.
Yeah.
Marion, thank you. Thanks for the call, and thank you very much for listening to the program.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. It's 49 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. Stay tuned. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. From Los Angeles to Columbia, South Carolina, from Birmingham, Alabama to Baltimore, universal basic income programs are chalking up proof after proof of their viability. Basically, just giving people, low-income people, poor people, somewhere between $500 and $1,500 a month, no strings attached, is lifting people out of poverty, getting them back on track, getting them into solid middle-class jobs, helping their children tremendously. This works. Now, we don't have to do UBI in the United States. We're the only developed country in the world that doesn't have a national health care program. Health expenses are whacking a lot of low-income people. We're the only developed country in the world that doesn't have free college education. Education expenses are whacking people. There's a lot we could do. We can subsidize housing. We can subsidize food. We do that with food stamps. We could expand it. There's a lot we could do to benefit from this. There's a whole report about that over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out.
Came from humble Georgia soil, with a heart so pure and free from spoil. A man of faith who stood so tall. You lived your values through it all. When others took the easy way, you chose the truth come what may. You fought for peace, you stood for right. In the darkest times you were the light. Jimmy Carter, you've always been my hero, a voice for justice when the world was cold. You saw the future, tried to save the earth. A man of kindness, love, and endless work through all the battles.
It's 9 minutes before the hour. Welcome back. Picking up your calls here. Tom in Lebanon, Ohio. Hey, Tom, what's up?
I just got to say that there's a secret about Trump. The reason he doesn't have pets is because he eats his pets.
He certainly seems obsessed with eating pets, I'll give you that.
Well, the reason I called was because here in Ohio, I went to vote, and we have a ballot initiative about gerrymandering.
I know.
And it's very confusing.
Yep.
Because if you've heard about this already?
I have, and your Secretary of State wrote or rewrote the ballot measure in a way that that you can't tell if you're voting for or against gerrymandering, because the Republicans desperately want to retain gerrymandering. So tell us which way Ohioans should be voting on this, Tom.
Yes. And you know something, Tom, I wasn't aware of this because we don't have a newspaper here in Lebanon. Mm-hmm. So I wasn't aware of the issues involved. I heard gerrymandering, and I'm against gerrymandering. So when I read the thing, the first thing it says, repeal constitutional protections against gerrymandering. Well, it's just the opposite of what,
it's a double or triple negative, isn't it?
Exactly. It was crazy. But anyway, I just wanted to put this out there so that people in Ohio will know if they oppose gerrymandering, they need to vote yes.
Okay. If you oppose gerrymandering, vote yes. Tom, thank you very much for that. I do appreciate it. And we've had David Pepper on the program, the former chairman of your Democratic Party in Ohio, and he's mentioned this also. These tricks that the Republicans play when they just can't play fair. They never play fair.
Here's the other thing too. Tom, one other point I want to make. The Citizens Against Politicians who brought the initiative up, they filed a lawsuit, and the Supreme Court on partisan lines voted, and it said, we cannot change the ballot language unless it's deceptive and confusing. Well, that's what it is.
Exactly.
They're so corrupt.
No, you've got a Republican Supreme Court there, too. You're absolutely right. Tom, thank you. Thank you very much for the call. Tina in Cottonwood, Arizona. Hey, Tina, what's up?
Well, I read a disturbing article in Newsweek that said Maricopa County over here in Arizona, the officials said that it could take up to 10 to 13 days to count the votes in Maricopa County.
Is that because they're mandating a hand recount of everything?
I don't know what they're going to do, but we count our mail-in ballots early, so what's it going to take 10 to 13 days to count up all the votes?
I think, I can't speak specifically to what's going on in Arizona or even in Maricopa County, but I can tell you that, for example, in Pennsylvania, in 2019, Republicans passed a law saying that, or maybe it was 2020, the Republicans passed a law saying that mail-in ballots could not even be opened or counted until after the election was over, which guarantees that we won't know the results of Pennsylvania until, at the very earliest, probably late Wednesday after the election, and probably Thursday. And so it sounds like they're trying to do the same thing. And Republicans do this so that they can squeal about election fraud, so that they can claim that the election's being stolen right in front of our eyes. Look at this. Donald Trump won the time of day election, but now all these quack. So get ready. It's going to come. Tina, thank you for the call. Alex in Orange County, California. Hey, Alex, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Thanks so much for taking my call. I've been a long-time listener with my parents, and thank you so much for your encouragement to help out. I am actually writing postcards as you speak on my day off.
God bless you, Alex.
People out to vote in Pennsylvania. Just want to mention one quick thing. I'm always so shocked. I'm 31 years old, maybe looking at having kids in the future. Why aren't the Republicans doing anything to help people with front load having kids, making housing more affordable, making child care? I heard South Korea wants to make it $7 a day or something. If they really want people to have kids, let's have them do that.
No, they just want to pander to the right-wing religious freaks in the Catholic and evangelical movements. That's it. I mean, they're just looking for votes. The Republican Party is and has been throughout my entire lifetime, basically the party of the very wealthy, but there's not enough wealthy people to get them votes. So they pander to groups, they pander to racists, they pander to religious freaks. But they really, they'll talk pro-life all day long, but if they were really pro-life, if they were really pro-child, as you point out, Alex, they would be doing something about it. Instead, they actually fight these efforts. When Democrats say, okay, well, let's renew the WIC program, women and infants, children, that gives food subsidies to low-income women who just gave birth, the Republicans say no. They fight these things. So, it's just a continual battle. Alex, thank you for the call.
Crazy world.
Yeah, it
Thank you
is.
for what you do, Tom.
Thank you, Alex. Thanks for your kind words, and your point was very, very well made. Thank you. And thanks for being with us today. We'll be back tomorrow. Anything Goes Friday. Same time, same place. In the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires all of us, and that includes you. So get out there, get active, tag, you're it. Have a great afternoon. Be good to yourself and the folks around you. Stay safe, and I'll catch up with you tomorrow.
Been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free, and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com. In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us.